Chapter 1483. Naturally, the one who devoured Hall's doppelganger was Grim, who had transformed into a devouring demon fish. The divine mastiff, the python, and Hall's doppelganger had all died at Grim's hands. The only remaining purple eagle had spread its wings and soared into the sky, shrieking as it fled back to its team. "Cover me. We'll split the loot when we get back." Grim sent a mental message to Antuso before he shook his bloated, devouring demon fish body and fled back to his team. Its fat and huge stomach was still swelling and vibrating, as if some monster was crazily making a ruckus inside. In the distance, when the gods sensed the sudden disappearance of Hall's doppelganger's quintessence aura, they cursed loudly as they rushed over. The destruction of Hall's doppelganger was nothing to be surprised about. However, they had to retrieve the quintessence fragment hidden in Hall's doppelganger. Otherwise, Hall would lose this part of his power forever. If Hall lost too many pieces of divinity, he would no longer be able to gather a complete piece of divinity, and he would drop from a Tier 5 lesser god to a lesser god. In serious cases, he might even fall back to the demigod rank and lose his status as a true god. Hence, Grim's doppelganger could die, but he had to find a way to retrieve the quintessence fragment. Several gods on good terms with the god of hunting immediately commanded their doppelgangers to pounce on Grim, who had just devoured Hall's doppelganger. When Grim saw the many doppelgangers pouncing at him, he no longer dared to linger on the battlefield. He scrambled back to his camp. The gods' doppelgangers wanted to give chase, but they were intercepted by the sorcerers. Immediately, an intense battle broke out on the battlefield. In the past, Grim would have had a hard time devouring an opponent of the same tier. But now, he had the Book of Darkness and the Divine Fire Bead to protect his body and prevent his doppelganger from breaking free. He then channeled the inextinguishable flame into his stomach and used all sorts of enhancements to refine Hall's doppelganger. After hiding in the wizard camp, Grim, who had turned into a fat fish, crawled in the void and killed the wisp of Hall's divine soul with great difficulty. He then refined Hall's body into the divine power of the beast god, and the divine fragment in Hall's body became Grim's spoils of war. Sensing the disappearance of Hall's doppelganger, Antuso, who had been guarding him, asked impatiently, "Did you kill him? How many quintessence fragments are there? Spit them out and let me see." Grim opened his mouth, and a dazzling, mysterious crystal slowly floated out of it. Quintessence fragment. It really is. Arturo moved closer and sensed for a moment. Then he said excitedly, "I think this divine spar shard can be divided into 3 parts. How are we going to split it?" "2 for me and 1 for you. I lost quite a bit in the battle just now, so I have to take the bigger share." Grim rolled his eyes, and a very human-like expression appeared on his fat, ugly face. No, this is a quintessence fragment. We can't split it like this. We have to split it evenly. I'll use other resources to compensate you for your hard work." At this point, even if they were friends, Antuso would not budge. After all, this was related to a quintessence fragment. The Magi had been waging war against the world of gods for years because of the quintessence fragments, divinity, and divine force in the bodies of the gods. Although the power system of the gods was completely different from that of the sorcerers, these 3 systems were completely universal. Simply put, God Fire was a source of energy, divinity was the embodiment of divine force, divinity was the foundation of divine force, and a divine domain was the domain in which a god possessed divine force. Quintessence was the core of a true god's power, and most of their power depended on it. Legend had it that some mortals had accidentally obtained a quintessence and became gods in one go. Quintessence was a necessary tool for gods to absorb and use the power of faith. At the same time, it could accept the prayers and requests of believers to the true God and process the information. At the same time, the gods would create a network of faith to receive the power of faith, and the quintessence was an indispensable terminal and core. The number of quintessence fragments represented the true rank of a particular god. The god of hunting Hall was a weak rank 5 god, and he definitely had a complete quintessence fragment and some quintessence fragments. In order to replace his main body in battle, he would split off some quintessence fragments to act as a carrier for his clone's consciousness. The fact that Hall's clone could summon 3 God-ranked battle companions was obviously related to the 3 quintessence fragments in his body. Quintessence was the core of a god's power, and to Magi, it was the purest form of energy conversion. If the magic weapons created by the gods wanted to become divine weapons, the materials needed were quintessence and divinity. Quintessence bestowed a divine weapon with a high rank and attack power, while divinity could bestow a divine weapon with special divine characteristics. Due to the different systems of power, Magi could not directly fuse with quintessence, but they could use them to create high-grade magic weapons that were most compatible with their own power. A quintessence fragment combined with a certain amount of divinity could create a rank 5 magic weapon. The more quintessence fragments used, the more divinity there would be, and the more powerful the magic weapon would be. With such a temptation, all gods were naturally like human-shaped treasure troves in the eyes of Magi. If they could skin a god, pull out his tendons, squeeze out his bones, and boil the oil, the Magi would definitely be satisfied with what they could squeeze out. For Grimm and Ardos, who were still at the beginning of rank 5, a quintessence fragment was equivalent to a rank 5 magic weapon. They had no choice but to place great importance on it and fight for it. No, my body was beaten to a pulp just now, and I put in the most effort. I have to take the most. I'll take the second, and you take the first. I'll compensate you with some divinity. Grimm naturally wouldn't spit out such a treasure so easily. He opened his mouth and spat out another ball of golden light the size of a human head. Within the light, he could vaguely see all sorts of colorful lines wandering and wriggling like snakes with their own consciousness. Ardos hesitated for a moment. Although he really wanted to fight for some spoils of war, what he saw on the battlefield made him a little afraid. Although Grimm was just a newbie, he had some good stuff in his hands. It was not wise to fall out with him for a mere quintessence fragment. It was better to do him a favor and improve their relationship. Thinking of this, Ardos could only nod and accept the distribution plan. Grimm spat out his power, and the dazzling shard of divinity split into 3, becoming the 3 smallest shards of divinity. One of the orbs and the divinity floated in front of Arturo, who immediately put it away with a smile. Grimm, on the other hand, put away the 2 shards of divinity and returned to his human form. I'm going to take a stroll around the battlefield and see what I can find. What about you? Ardos could not help but ask fervently. I'm not going. Grimm sighed and pointed at his body. There were bloody holes everywhere, crisscrossing claw marks all over. Many of the wounds were covered in black gas, obviously tainted by some strange energy. I'm afraid I'll have to recuperate for a long time with this body alone. Then you can go back first. Let me take a look around. Due to his desire for spoils of war, coupled with the fact that he hadn't suffered too much damage in the previous battle, and Tuso's body swayed as he once again concealed himself and quickly headed towards the battlefield. Grimm put Remy back into the Book of Darkness, then turned around and flew towards the teleportation brick behind him. There was naturally a rank 6 great sorcerer standing guard here, and he had naturally witnessed the entire process of Grimm's battle with Hall's clone. Although the battle had not ended, Ardos naturally did not stop Grimm, who had put in a lot of effort and needed to recuperate at the rear. What a lucky kid. You've obtained a quintessence fragment as soon as you arrived. I'm Magus Burien, in charge of this battlefield. Leave me a way to contact you using a spell. Perhaps we can exchange our spoils of war later. The rank 6 Magus in charge of the rear nodded approvingly, actually taking the initiative to give his spell brand to Grimm. Grimm hurriedly and respectfully passed his spell brand to the other party as well, before stepping onto the teleportation brick and disappearing in a flash of blinding light. Once he returned to Boulder Castle, Grimm used the excuse of needing to recuperate to hide in his residence. In a secret room, he deactivated all the defensive spells and began to carefully count his spoils. Divinity Fragment, 2 Divinity, 38 units. Divine Force Crystals, 2,174 pieces. The reason why he had so many Divine Force Crystals was purely because Hall's clone had been devoured by Grimm before he had the chance to squander his divine force. Hence, after refining the clone's divine body, he had naturally obtained quite a lot of divine force crystals and divinity. A portion of the divinity came from the two divine creatures that Grimm had killed. Although they did not have a quintessence fragment in their bodies, they had still given Grimm a lot of divinity and divine force crystals. Divinity was a good thing. Any item that was forged with a trace of divinity would have a strange effect similar to the power of laws. This divinity came from the god of Hunt, Hall, and was naturally linked to his divine domain and divine soul. What kind of attributes did this divinity have? Grimm could not help but order Chip analyze this divinity. Chapter 1484. Divinity was a pretty good thing. To a certain extent, divinity was a special trait unique to true gods. To a true god, divinity was related to a god's personality, beliefs, principles, alignment, and a series of other mysterious energies. Mortals could absorb divinity to gain an increase in lifespan, resistance, and a series of extraordinary abilities, and attaching divinity to equipment could also add some corresponding characteristics of divine power. All in all, divinity and divine spark were top-grade resources that Magi coveted. Beep. Divinity assessment complete. Target's divinity belongs to the god of the hunt, Howl. Rank 6, a mid-ranked god of the Orc pantheon. Estimated total divine spark is 24 points. Domains of divine domain include hunting, massacre, sacrifice, archery, wild beasts, tracking, trap-making, perception. Target's divine forces: bleeding, sure hit, tracking mark, ready strike, kill. If the host directly absorbs divinity, it can be used to raise the body's basic attributes or strengthen a single aspect of a basic characteristic. However, the divinity is biased towards massacre and tracking, and can only be used to strengthen agility and spiritual perception. 38 points of divinity is estimated to give the host 6 points of agility and a 30% increase in the range of spiritual perception. If this divinity is used to nourish the astral beast bloodline, it can increase the speed of bloodline unlocking by 26%. If this divinity is used to nourish the host's life force, it can increase the host's lifespan by 380 years. If this divinity is used on a mortal creature, 1 point of divinity can give them a random divine force characteristic in A. Corresponding domain. A single creature that uses more than 5 points of divinity will become a divine creature. Looking at the AI, Chip's list of items, Grimm's emotions surged, and his emotions surged. Divinity was indeed a good thing, able to give him such a huge increase in strength. However, when he thought about how the divinity could only be used to increase his agility, Grimm felt a little stifled. Of the 4 main attributes of strength, vitality, agility, and spirit, the one that was the least useful to him was agility. He was a wizard with a formidable firepower renowned throughout the multiverse. On the battlefield, he did not need to move mysteriously or move as fast as a ghost. All he needed was to bombard. Therefore, among the 4 main attributes, Grimm's dexterity was only 18 points. Even if the divinity in front of him was pushed to 24 points, it seemed probably it would not be of any substantial help to his current battle. Of course, agility might not be important to Grimm, but it was extremely important to Mary. However, Mary had already reached the peak of Tier 4, just above the threshold of divine mortality. Her agility had also reached the limit of 49 points. Even if she wanted to improve her agility, there was no way she could. Therefore, these things were temporarily useless to Mary. As for using divinity to increase one's vitality, that was even more of a waste. Grimm's current lifespan was more than 12,000 years, but the journey he had traveled was less than 1/20th of that. Under such circumstances, extending it for another 300 years or so did not seem to be of much use. Using divinity to create divine creatures? If Grimm was a powerful god with an inexhaustible amount of divinity, it might not be a bad idea to create one or two divine pets that could accompany him forever. However, Grimm was a wizard, and he could only obtain divinity on the battlefield. Therefore, he did not have the qualifications and strength to be so wasteful and extravagant. Based on this analysis, the best way to make use of divinity was to nourish the bloodline of astral beasts or to create powerful wizard artifacts. Currently, Grimm only had 2 artifacts that he had plundered from outsiders, and he did not have a single real wizard artifact that he could use. For a wizard who was full of confidence, this was completely unreasonable. However, Grimm was not proficient in crafting wizard artifacts. If he wanted to create a custom-made high-grade wizard artifact for himself, he could only slowly explore. Since he had made up his mind, Grimm no longer hesitated. He reached his hand into the ball of divinity and silently absorbed it. Absorbing divinity was not a simple matter. First, he had to destroy the will of the god left in the divinity. Otherwise, if he rashly absorbed the divinity of a god, he would become the host of the god's soul. Once the god used his power, Grimm would also become his soul puppet. Grimm would never make such a mistake. The method Grimm used to destroy halls was the law of fire. The law of fire was not any weaker than divine force or God's soul. Therefore, the law of fire was enough to destroy the appendages that should not exist. Damn wizard, I've already remembered the aura of your soul. One day, you'll become my prey. Under the burning of the law of fire, wisps of black smoke escaped from the ball of divinity and condensed into the ugly face of the god of the hunt, Hall, in front of Grimm. He roared, yelled, and cursed, but he couldn't stop Grimm from annihilating this wisp of his divine soul. He, a mid-grade 6 god with a divinity of 24, had lost his clone, and he had lost 3 divinity shards. This meant that his divinity had fallen to 21. This was not high, but it was not low either. It was still within the range of a mid-grade god. However, if something unexpected happened and he lost 1 or 2 divinity shards, his rank would be in jeopardy. Once his divinity fell below 20, he would not be able to maintain his status as a mid-grade god. Even his divine kingdom would suffer, because of this, shrinking by half. Even if he obtained some divinity shards and returned to rank 6, he would need to expend a large amount of divine force to rebuild his divine kingdom. If such a situation were to occur, it would be a huge disaster for any god. Hence, whether or not Hall would dare to casually send a clone down was a new problem. This was an indescribable sore spot for the gods. Sending a clone down could replace the main body and move about freely. This was undoubtedly a great advantage for them. However, if the clone was destroyed, the divinity shard would not be able to escape, and the loss of power would be real. The power of a god was determined by the amount of divinity they controlled. According to the laws of the world of gods, if a god wanted to use the power of faith from their worshippers to condense a divinity shard from the plane, they would need to expend a terrifying amount of effort, energy, and time. Under normal circumstances, a god with 100,000 worshippers would need 1,000 years to condense a single divinity shard from the plane's belief system. This was a benefit that only existed when there were no other gods competing for the corresponding divine domain. Once another god interfered with their divine domain, the speed at which the divinity shard was converted would depend on their control over the domain. The more gods they divided up, the slower the conversion of divine force to divinity shard. Hence, even without the invasion of Magi, the world of gods was not a pure land. Almost every god had a divine domain that overlapped with each other. However, as long as it did not involve the divine domain, there was still room for compromise. However, if there was a conflict between the divine domains of 2 gods, there would be no room for negotiation. The one with the bigger fist would survive and inherit everything. As for the other, his divine soul would be destroyed, and his divine kingdom would collapse. The remaining worshippers would either be taken in and reformed by the other, or perish together with the dead god. It was just like how it was impossible for there to be 2 gods of death in a plane. Once the divine domains of 2 gods of death completely overlapped, even if the will of the plane did not add fuel to the fire, they would still fight to the death. It was precisely because the world of gods was at war with each other that the Magi found an opportunity to take advantage of the many gods. Divinity and divinity were the most valuable treasures that Magi could obtain. Divinity could be used to increase one's own strength, or it could be used to create high-grade magic weapons. Divinity was a tool to convert the power of faith from worshippers into the purest divine force. However, Grimm was a magus and not a god, so he could not directly use this power. However, this did not mean that Grimm could not use divinity to increase his own strength. At the very least, Grimm had a treasure that could make use of divinity. The Divine Fire Orb. The Divine Fire Orb was a grade 5 divine weapon created by the god of fire in the world of gods. Using the fragment of divinity from the clone of the god of fire to increase the quality of the Divine Fire Orb was undoubtedly a good idea. With the increase in the power of the Divine Fire Orb, Grimm's strength would naturally increase as well, and he would be able to use fire energy to a greater extent. As for the 2 pieces of divinity from the god of the hunt, perhaps they were the most suitable for sacrifice. If he sacrificed them to the fire elemental plane and used them to increase Grimm's control of the laws of fire, it would be more direct and pure than any external object. Of course, sacrificing them to the Magus world consciousness was also a good idea. It was a pity that the Magus world could not give him the laws of fire he needed, so the fire elemental plane was more suitable. The more he thought about it, the more impatient Grimm became. Chapter 1485. Fire Elemental Plane, Molten Altar. In the middle of the valley, a teleportation portal slowly opened. Grimm had once again returned. Compared to the last time, the area around the lava lake had become much livelier. Other than the molten core giants, dragon web spiders, and metal magical machinery, there were many other fire creatures of various forms. There were low-level fire elementals, flame spirits, and fire essences, to mid-level and high-level fire giants, molten hounds, and giant lava beasts. It could be said that the area around the molten core altar had become a museum of fire creatures. One could see most of the native creatures of the fire elemental plane. Seeing the dragon web spider queen Lakebeth rush over from the lava lake, Grimm frowned and said in a low voice, "What's going on here? Why are there so many low-level creatures?" Hearing Grimm's question, Lakebeth hurriedly lowered its body and explained in a strange, hoarse voice, "My lord, these are the laborers I've enslaved from the surroundings. I'm using them to speed up the construction of the wizard's pagoda." At this point, it purposely lowered its voice and said in a trembling voice, "My lord, you know that this molten altar is a little strange. Low-level creatures will mysteriously disappear if they stay here for too long. So if I don't capture more people, the number of laborers won't be able to keep up." Disappear? Grimm was slightly taken aback. He immediately recalled the strange situation when he first came into contact with the molten altar and believed everything Lakebeth had said. "Immediately send people to build an altar for me. I want to offer something as a sacrifice." "Altar? My lord, what kind of flame altar do you need?" "The highest. I need to communicate with the plane's consciousness of the fire elemental plane." Hiss! Lakebeth immediately drew in a cold breath. One had to know that for flame lords like them, they would usually offer sacrifices to the flame lords around their territories. As for communicating with the plane's consciousness of the fire elemental plane, one should not expect the plane's consciousness to respond to one's request without a high level of sacrifice. Even this veteran lord of the flames became restless and excited when he suddenly took on such a huge responsibility. Communicating with the will of the dimension. That kind of flame altar isn't something that can be easily created. I'm afraid that only the Flame Monarch has such a high-level world altar. Latchbeth's hairy spider face revealed a troubled expression. "You mean we can't make it?" "It's not that it's impossible, but it'll take a long time, and we'll need to search for the necessary resources. I estimate that it'll take at least 10 years to complete the construction." It was Grimm's turn to be shocked. Only at this moment did he realize that the two worlds had completely different values of time and time. In the fire elemental plane, even the powerful flame overlords didn't know how to hoard resources in advance. They could slowly increase their strength just by sitting at home, so their thirst for resources from the outside world became less intense. He did not have much desire for resources, materials, or territory. In short, he was too lazy to move if he could. He stayed in his lair all day, muddling through his days, using time to accumulate power bit by bit. This was the way most flame creatures survived, by etching their souls. There was no pressure to survive, and there was no urge to evolve. In the Magus world, they did their best to plunder resources and knowledge, hoarding all the magic materials they might need in the future. This was the attitude and habit of human magi. There would never be an awkward situation where a grade 4 Magus couldn't even create a world altar. 10 years. Damn it, 10 years was too long. Who knew if these shards of divinity would cause trouble in his hands? It was better to turn them into his own power as soon as possible. Should he go to Groom's and freeload his world altar? However, bringing such a precious offering to the private territory of another flame sovereign. Even if Grimm did not believe that the other party would be so narrow-minded, he could not bring himself to do such a risky thing. Seeing Grimm's expression, Latchbeth couldn't help but stretch out a furry foreleg and point at the lava lake in the distance. He had a strange expression on his face. "My lord, isn't that a world altar? Why do we have to make one ourselves?" Grimm was stunned. He turned around and stared blankly at the dilapidated old altar that stood quietly in front of the lava lake. For some reason, when his gaze fell on the altar, he felt as if a string in his heart had been tugged, causing him to tremble violently. He was overwhelmed with emotions. Latchbeth informed Sock to withdraw all the flame creatures and magical equipment from the molten fire altar. Clear the area immediately. Hearing Grimm's order, Latchbeth hurriedly bowed and replied, "Yes, I'll do it right away." After all, this was Grimm's private territory. Once he gave an order, no one would question or defy him. In just a quarter of an hour, the bustling construction site had become completely silent. Not a single person could be seen around the molten flame altar. Grimm's immense mental power slowly roamed around the molten flame altar, slowly but surely sweeping through every inch of land and every inch of space. From the sky to the ground, even the bottom of the lava lake was thoroughly scanned. After confirming that there was nothing out of the ordinary, Grimm stretched out his hand and opened a door of flames in the air. A moment later, the light doppelganger Grimm had left and the sorcerer world walked out. "Have you decided what to do with this divine spark fragment?" the light clone asked curiously. "Yes." Grimm exchanged a glance with it, and their thoughts became synchronized in an instant. The experiences and changes that they had gone through over the past few decades were very clear to them. The Horton Witchcraft Academy had expanded even more than before. Wizard Onley of the Magus Association had successfully advanced to rank 5 and had left for the outside world. Wizard Nicholas of the Central Region had fallen into a trap in a battle with the underground world, and his fate was unknown. Insect Lich Bliss of the family had successfully advanced to rank 4 and had become the core fighting force of the family. Many members of the family had advanced to rank 3, and the strength of the middle ranks was steadily increasing. The elder of the family, Goblin Cobby, had failed in his latest life-prolonging ritual and was about to die. The Goblin Clan had proposed a plan to build a magical titan and was applying for resources from the family. In the north, the Ice Lady, Berserk Witch, and Lucia had all advanced to rank 3. Grimm took the fragment of divine spark from the light clone and tossed a few strands of divinity to it. Then he said softly, "Give this to Mary. With this divinity, she'll be able to increase her agility and strengthen the Blood Tribe's abilities. Also, tell her that she'll be able to meet me after the Wizard's Pagoda is completed." The light clone chuckled and absorbed the divinity into its body. It then turned around and returned to the Magus world through the flaming door. After the light clone left, Grimm could not help but sigh inwardly. He had only left the Magus world for a few decades, but in his heart, it felt like he had left for an entire century. Everything that had happened there, even if it was related to his disciples and family, was like listening to an unfamiliar story to him. He felt an indescribable sense of alienation. The process of pursuing power had made him take large strides forward, but he had unknowingly left many of his companions behind. His memories of the past were still there, and everything that had happened was still vivid in his mind. However, the emotions and humanity attached to his memories had become blurry and faded with the transformation of his body. His overly rational and realistic mind had gotten rid of the hypocrisy and self-deception in human nature. He no longer wanted to indulge himself with illusory, ephemeral love and kinship. He wanted to travel the world, explore the endless plains, and search for the secrets behind the world. This simple yet realistic idea gradually surfaced in his mind, becoming the dream that he had been thinking about for a long time. Before advancing to level 5, the pressure of survival had forced Grimm to keep moving forward. All of his efforts were for the sake of survival. For himself, for the sake of his family, he did his best to run forward. After advancing to level 5, the dimension of his life had suddenly extended to 10,000 years. The laws of his body and soul had caused his thoughts and consciousness to undergo some subtle changes. The pressure of survival was no longer that great. Even with the great witch Medusa, the god of wisdom, the god of fire, and the god of hunting eyeing him covetously, Grimm was still living a carefree life. If the other side forced him too much, he could even give up on the Steel City and the Exodar camp. Grimm had retreated to the fire elemental plane, which would not allow a large-scale invasion from the outside world. If the enemies wanted to cause trouble for Grimm, they could only infiltrate the fire elemental plane themselves and search for him, like finding a needle in a haystack. If the fire elemental plane was not safe, Grimm did not mind abandoning everything and wandering the galaxy. In any case, with his abilities, he could go anywhere he wanted. It would not be that easy for the other side to force him to his death. Moreover, he was alone and had nothing to worry about. He would not stay behind and fight to the death for a mere territory. It was this relaxed state of mind that allowed him to attack and retreat at will that gave him his freedom. Chapter 1486. In front of the molten altar, Grimm stood there silently. He had a feeling that if he used this world altar to perform a high-grade sacrifice, something unexpected might happen. However, he also had a feeling that it might not be a bad thing. Since it was not a bad thing, it must be a good thing. With the strange thought of trying everything, Grimm finally decided to perform the sacrifice here. Sacrificing was actually a very simple matter. Prepare a magic altar so that the sacrificer could use it to contact an abnormally powerful existence. Then prepare a few qualified sacrifices, and it would be enough to support the entire process. As for whether that abnormally powerful existence would have the time to respond to the requests of some ants, it would depend on its mood at the time as well as the level of the sacrifice. As long as the level of the sacrifice was high enough, even if the sacrificer was not very respectful, the powerful existence would not care too much about it. On the other hand, the mortals would often hold a grand ceremony during the sacrifice, choosing young and beautiful girls to be the ceremonial attendants, and slaughtering herds of livestock for a large-scale blood meal. The goal was nothing more than to please the powerful existence that was high up above. However, to Grimm, the sacrifice was just a fair trade with another powerful existence, and there was no religious superstition involved. Both parties took what they needed, and it was enough for everyone to be happy. There was no need for such fancy things. Hence, after chasing away the people around the molten altar, Grimm slowly walked to the ancient altar that had been abandoned for tens of thousands of years. Grimm gently stepped on the severely damaged stone stairs. He walked up the stairs with a sentimental feeling, as if he was looking at an ancient relic. Finally, he stood in front of the strange, compass-shaped stone platform after a quarter of an hour. He did not know what the stone platform was made of. It was grayish-white, simple and old, and there were all sorts of strange patterns and runes carved on it. Even with Grimm's knowledge and the AI chip's omniscient ability, it was difficult for them to understand these ancient runes that had been lost for a long time. However, what was strange was that when he looked at the stone platform, without anyone teaching him or communicating with him, the incantations of these strange mage words naturally appeared in his mind. As for the specific use of the runes and the meaning of the incantations, he still had no idea. Interesting. Grimm cannot help but sigh. Great omnipresent will of fire. Grimm hereby requests you to accept the exquisite gift I've prepared for you. Grimm closed his eyes and chanted the incantation aloud. While chanting, he was communicating with the mighty will of fire in his mind. But unfortunately, no matter how hard he tried and how pious he was, there was no movement on the altar. There was not even a trace of the flow of the fire element. What was this? Wouldn't release the eagle without seeing the rabbit? Grimm sighed again. He took out a quintessence fragment and gently placed it on the stone table. The effect was immediate. As soon as the quintessence shard touched the warm stone platform, a dazzling golden beam of light shot out of the stone platform and turned into a huge pillar of light that soared into the sky. As soon as the beam of light touched the sky, it exploded into countless beautiful and dreary golden rain of light. It rained down from the sky and enveloped the entire molten altar, isolating it from the outside world. Immediately after, an indescribably powerful will descended from the void and locked onto Grimm's spiritual will. All of Grimm's spiritual senses and the AI chip's ability to see through everything was pushed back into his body. Apart from the simple sight, hearing, and touch that were not affected, everything related to extraordinary powers seemed to have been sealed and could not be used at all. In front of that powerful will, Grimm was like an ordinary person. He no longer had anything to be arrogant about. Human, are you the one who wishes to offer this quintessence shard? This was an exceptionally majestic and mysterious voice. It did not have the emotions and passion of a living being, only an ancient aura and boundless majesty. Great will of flame, I am indeed making a sacrifice to you. Please accept my offering. As a Tier 5 great sorcerer, Grimm was well aware of the various sacrificial procedures. There was no need to hide anything when communicating with such a majestic existence. Their spiritual wills were connected, and Grimm's true thoughts and desires could not be hidden from the other party. I can accept the offering. Tell me your request. I want to raise the rank of my flames. I'm not satisfied with their power. I sense two completely different fire origin auras on you. Which one do you want to improve? Can I know their true effects in advance? Grimm tried to communicate with the Great Will. Human, one of your flames has a trace of undying. I can raise it to soul ignition. From now on, your flames will have the ability to burn souls. The other flame has a trace of mirror image. You can raise it to doppelganger. From now on, these doppelgangers will have around 30% of your original body's attack power. It seemed like this was the benefit of offering a sacrifice for the first time, and the flame will of the fire elemental plane seemed especially gentle and friendly. Undying to soul ignition seemed to have raised the level of the laws of fire, making Grimm's attacks even more terrifying. Mirror image to doppelganger increased Grimm's control of the battlefield and survivability. With 3 fire doppelgangers that could fight and combine, Grimm could make more combinations on the battlefield. Grimm licked his lips, hesitating for a moment. Human, I can sense the presence of other shards of divinity on you. Why don't you sacrifice them all? Then you won't have to worry about choosing. The flame will reminded him. Damn, this flame will have a dog's nose. He could even smell this, as expected of an old fox. Any intelligent life that had lived for a long time would become so sly and cunning. He even knew how to use hunger marketing. While cursing the flame, Wolf for being evil, Grimm took out another shard of divinity and placed it on the stone table. He said, I choose to raise my doppelganger. As for this extra shard of divinity, I want to ask you for a favor. What favor? It seemed like the flame was in a good mood after seeing 2 shards of divinity. Help me fuse these two things together. With that, Grim carefully placed the fiery shard of divinity and the Vulcan bead on the stone table. The request does not exceed the value of the sacrificed items. The request is accepted. The sacrifice begins now. After the flame, Will's majestic voice sounded. The stone table was immediately ignited with golden flames. In the flames, the two shards of divinity that Grim placed on the stone table immediately melted. Then, they disintegrated into countless dazzling fireflies that scattered into the endless void. This was the flame while taking away its own sacrifice. In the next second, two golden beams of light shot down from the void. One enveloped Grim, and the other enveloped the fiery shard of divinity and the Vulcan bead on the stone table. Countless mysterious flame runes condensed from the void and entered Grim's body like tired birds returning to the forest. Grim immediately felt a mysterious force in his body, transforming the flame phantom in his soul consciousness. A lot of knowledge about the origin of fire that he couldn't understand in the past suddenly emerged and became a part of his soul consciousness. On the other side, the fiery shard of divinity that was enveloped by the golden beams of light also melted, turning into a strange liquid that fused with the Vulcan bead. The Vulcan bead immediately shone brightly. Wisps of golden flames intertwined with the flame runes that were as dense as morning stars, transforming the internal structure of the divine weapon on a large scale. The Vulcan bead's furious and tyrannical roars echoed in the void. Waves of bright yellow flames spewed out of the Vulcan bead, resisting the transformation of the flame runes. If Grim had been the one carrying out this transformation, he would definitely have had a hard time withstanding the god of fire's destructive flames. However, in the fire elemental plane, even the rank 7 god of fire, Renai, could not resist the sacred flame will. The roars of anger and unwillingness gradually faded away. The fire god bead shone like a miniature sun, undergoing an unprecedented transformation. The one guiding this transformation was the great flame that had received benefits from Grim. It had to be said that you get what you pay for. With the flame will at work, Grim no longer had to worry about the original owner of the Vulcan bead. The flame will had erased all traces and divine soul fragments left behind by Renai and the Vulcan bead, leaving Grim with a new divine weapon that needed to be recognized as its master. The grade of this divine artifact was high grade rank 5, which was a small rank higher than before it was modified. However, what excited Grim the most was that the rank 5 divine spell Scorched Earth stored in the Vulcan bead had become Berserk Flame Strike. This was a bona fide tier 5 fire spell with a complete spell model and activation incantation. As long as Grim was willing to study and comprehend it, he would definitely be able to grasp this super violent fire attack from scratch. Furthermore, these benefits were only a portion of the divine fire bead's transformation. Chapter 1487. The sacrificial ceremony was nearing its end, and the will of flame was slowly fading away. Grim seemed to suddenly remember something, and he asked loudly, "Great will of flame, if I want to become the flame monarch, what grade of item do I need to offer you?" "Flame monarch, if you want to gain my recognition and become one of the rulers of this world, you need to offer at least 20 shards of divinity. Of course, if it's the shard of flame, 15 is enough. 20 shards of divinity. Wasn't that the full power of a grade 6 god? He, a mere grade 5 fire wizard, had skinned a grade 6 god alive like a whale, and even kept all of the other party's power. No matter how conceited and confident Grim was, he did not dare hope that he could accomplish such an unbelievable feat. Sensing the will of flame disappear, Grim put away the divine fire bead, but he did not leave immediately. Instead, he stood there and waited silently. The sacrificial ceremony had gone too smoothly, too normal, and it seemed to deviate from what he had sensed before. Had he sensed wrongly, or had he overlooked something during the process? Grim pondered in silence, and he silently probed. However, just as Grim was feeling suspicious, An inexplicable mental message suddenly echoed in his mind. "Hey, kid, do you have any more treasures of this level? If you do, offer them to me. I'll definitely give you something better than that will of flame." Hearing this voice, Grimm's expression changed drastically. His expression was one of shock, but there was also a trace of certainty that it was as he had expected. Grimm closed his eyes and carefully examined his mind, but he still could not find the source of the mental message. All he knew was that it had suddenly appeared in his mind. "Kid, don't bother looking for me. My body has long since ceased to exist, and only a remnant of my soul is left wandering this land. I'll be blunt, kid. You're currently stepping on my body." The mental undulations that had appeared out of nowhere were so obscure and weak. Just the strength of this aura alone could not even be considered a grade 1 god. "Sir, you should be the powerful grade 8 Lord of Flames that fell in the history of the fire elemental plane, right? Have you found a way to resurrect him?" Grimm never dared to underestimate these high-level existences. Each of these old monsters possessed strange secret arts and forbidden techniques. If an old monster that had been dead for tens of thousands of years could be resurrected, Grimm would not be surprised at all. Instead, he would treat it as a matter of course. You know me?" The mental message fluctuated. "I don't know much. However, since I dare to choose this place as my private territory, I must have done all the research beforehand. Am I right, Lord Gimmenrath?" Grimm said half-jokingly. On the other side, the spiritual message suddenly disappeared. It was as if a person had suddenly stopped breathing and lost all the fluctuations. Grimm didn't find it strange and waited in silence. Perhaps a minute or a quarter of an hour had passed, or perhaps a day and a night had passed. As Grimm waited patiently, the mental message suddenly resounded in his mind again. "You haven't left. Why, kid?" When this voice sounded in his mind, a victorious smile appeared on Grimm's face. "Because I'm waiting for your decision." "Decision? Decision about what?" "Decide if you're going to walk this path of no return." "Kid, your strength isn't much, but your courage is not small. A mere grade 5 fellow actually dares to interfere in a conflict between grade 8 beings? Should I say that you're fearless because you're ignorant, or that your audacity has reached an inconceivable level?" "Of course it's the latter." Grimm smiled. "I know the consequences of working with you. However, if we only keep in contact, it shouldn't alarm your former enemies, right?" "Enemies? My enemies aren't in this plane. Furthermore, I've been dead for tens of thousands of years. It's a problem if they even remember me." "Good, very good. Then the biggest problem that affects our cooperation is, what is your relationship with the will of flame? Can it tolerate your resurrection?" The mysterious spiritual undulations suddenly stopped and only recovered after a long while. "Kid, my enemies back then weren't the will of fire, but the Titans. Those damn bastards. They used the excuse of cleaning up the malignant tumors of the various planes to destroy my soul. My divine kingdom collapsed, and I was forced to sleep for so many years." Leyland's eyes widened. "Respected Lord Manrith, your enemies are too powerful. I'm just a mere grade 5 magus, and under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be willing to get involved in your feud. So, I need to get a clear answer now. What is the relationship between you and the will of flame? What else? Of course, we don't restrict each other." The mysterious aura suddenly dimmed a little. "I was once a member of the Flame Lords, and I even reached the level of a Flame Lord at my strongest. I was only one step away from becoming a true Flame Lord. It's a pity that the damn Titans came looking for me at that time. They definitely wouldn't allow a true king to be born in the elemental plane, so they killed me and destroyed all traces of my existence. However, I'm still the most powerful existence in this world, and even the laws of this plane contain the aura of my soul. So, after tens of thousands of years, I've finally regained consciousness from the power of laws. However, it'll take a very long time for my strength to recover. The will of flame won't interfere with my freedom, but it won't help me anymore. It allows my consciousness to hide around a molten fire altar, but it doesn't care. If I have the chance to resurrect and become the true king of flames. It'll have the chance to suppress the other three elemental planes and become the strongest voice. So, it'll be happy to see that happen. Damn it. King of Flames. Elemental Lord. What are these things? I'm just a mere grade 5 magus. When did I get involved in something like this? Grim wailed in his heart as he casually cut off the connection with the mysterious spiritual undulations and turned to walk down the altar. He had no interest in participating in the death of some big shots in the plane. With his weak body as a grade 5 magus, he wouldn't even be able to be considered cannon fodder in such a scheme. If he really got on the good side of this former Lord of Flames, he might not even know how he died. Kid, don't be in such a hurry to reject me. We can talk. The spiritual undulations were extremely strange. Grim had clearly cut off the connection with it, but it still appeared in his mind. Grim did not hesitate and cut off the connection again. I can give you benefits. He cut off the connection again. The benefits I can give you are definitely more than the will of flame. He continued to cut off the connection. I still have the remnants of the divine kingdom's treasury. The spiritual undulations seemed to be driven mad by Grim, and finally stretched their necks and roared out. However, what was strange was that after this roar, Grim did not cut off the spiritual connection with it. The remnants of the divine kingdom's treasury. Grim could not help but mutter. He had once been a grade 8 Lord of Flames. His divine kingdom had been destroyed, and his body had dissipated, leaving behind only a remnant soul. However, as long as there was a little bit of the treasury left, even if it was just some scraps, it was enough to make Grim's imagination run wild. He knew that these things would burn his hands, and if he did not handle them properly, he would end up in trouble. However, the greed and desire in the depths of his soul made Grim stop in his tracks. He lowered his head and began to calculate. Kid, if you work with me, you won't lose out. You sacrificed 2 divine shards for the will of flame to give you that. If it was me, I'll definitely give you more than the will of flame. The spiritual undulations seemed to have found a way, and they immediately began to tempt Grim. Grim suddenly raised his head, and a disdainful smile appeared on his face. He actually ignored Gilmanretha's words and walked straight to the teleportation formation in the distance. Hey, come back. Kid, come back. The spiritual undulations were furious, and the rolling waves of fire even stirred up the lava lake. But it was a pity that no matter how it roared, Grim still left without a care in the world. Finally, as the white light of the teleportation formation lit up, the molten altar regained its peace. Wizard World, Crimson Wing. This was the 12th year since Grim left this world. The scattered forest of towers that had experienced many changes in power structure finally calmed down. With the Horton Wizard Academy led by the Crimson family, it gradually showed signs of rising in the central continent. The new and ambitious Crimson Wizards gradually climbed up the leadership ranks, while some of the old fellows who could not keep up with the family's advancement were eliminated, becoming stepping stones for the family's development. In a luxurious room on the top floor of the Wizard's Pagoda, the gnome Great Sage Cabby was lying on his back on a large, soft bed. His entire body was about to sink into the soft silk bedding. Beside him was a room full of green-skinned goblins. Among them, there were goblin sorcerers with wizard staffs, magic machinists with small mini-puppets on their shoulders, and mechanical warlocks who exuded a bloodthirsty aura. However, most of them were managers or leaders of the Chamber of Commerce dressed like merchants. Chapter 1488. Since Lord Kirby can't hold on any longer, ask him to hand over his authority as the leader of the trade union. Under the instigation of the veteran gnomes, a gnome leader wearing a well-ironed Merchant Association uniform with only a left ear on his head stood out and waved his arm as he shouted, "Left ear, what are you trying to do?" An old goblin wearing the robes of the Goblin Salvation Society stood up, glaring at the goblin leader. Beside him, the believers who had always viewed the great goblin sage as their savior gathered around and started arguing with the left ear. The goblin lock, who had already become a grade 3 magus, sat in a corner leisurely, gently caressing the short magic staff inlaid with rubies of the highest quality. The body of the staff was decorated with colorful diamonds and exquisite magical patterns, while he watched the dog-eat-dog battle in front of him without batting an eyelid. A Grade 3 Magus, and the commander of the Scarlet Fleet's flagship, Viscero. Any one of these two identities would allow him to stand proudly above the goblins present. No matter which side gained power, they would want to rope him in and would not dare to encroach on the goblin interests of Locke's faction. That was why he could calmly observe the quarrel in front of him, ignoring the political conspiracies and schemes behind it. Just like Locke, the leader of the mechanical warlocks, Blackwing, stood aloof. As one of the few armed leaders among the goblins who had grasped some elemental powers, Blackwing's individual strength was only at the pinnacle of Grade 2, and he did not seem to stand out. However, he led a goblin violent blood group of 13,000. Moreover, 10% of them were Grade 2. Even though the mechanical warlocks were not strong individually, they relied on their collective strength to rise to become the #1 faction among the goblins. Blackwing's position rose with the tide, and he became a hot commodity that all the goblin factions fought to rope in. Other than the two main branches of the goblin wizards and mechanical warlocks, the most important faction among the goblins was the Goblin Scientific Academy, which was made up of demonized goblins. They controlled 2 rank, 4 puppet dragons, and part of the Crimson Fleet. Thus, the Goblin Academy of Sciences, which mainly consisted of goblin engineers, mechanics, and technicians, became the representatives of the goblins. Even within the Crimson family, they had quite a bit of say. Normally, these forces would not interfere with each other's business. They each had their own areas of expertise and rarely interacted with each other. Therefore, the relationship between them could barely be maintained at the level of sitting together, drinking tea, and chatting. Once it involved the interests of the factions, they would definitely fight to the death. It was not to the extent of plotting to kill, but it was common for them to get beaten black and blue. In the past, the Gnome Great Sage had acted as a middleman and acted as a go-between for the Gnome faction. Thus, the Gnome faction was able to coexist peacefully. But now, with the Gnome Great Sage Cabby nearing the end of his life, the entire gnome race was facing a reshuffling of authority and restructuring. Hence, they gathered here and coveted the position of chairman of the trade union in Cabby's hands. Cabby, who was lying on a luxurious bed, had aged so much that it was impossible to look at him directly. The many life rituals had allowed him to surpass the limits of the gnome race's lifespan, becoming the first green-skinned gnome in history to live to 600 years old. However, at the brink of death, the power of death that had been delayed for centuries by the power of witchcraft had finally found him. His entire body and soul emitted a gloomy and decaying aura of death. "Get out of them," Cabby called out in a low, trembling voice. Cabby called out in a low, trembling voice. The elven priest in charge of taking care of Cabby stood up and gave the order to expel the goblins in the room who were shouting. "Get out! Lord Cabby needs some time alone. We can't go out. We still have to hear who Lord Cabby is going to replace him as chairman. That's right. The Gnome Trade Union cannot lose its leader. We need to choose a new chairman. I choose Boss Blackwing. Only he has the power to sit in this position." "Nonsense. Blackwing is already the leader of the mechanical warlocks. He can't hold 2 positions. That will cause a power imbalance. I choose Vice Chairman Bosch. Bosch is too old. He won't live for long. We should choose a younger one." "Then who should we choose?" "You?" It had to be said that after losing Cabby, the core person who could mediate the goblins, the entire goblin faction was in chaos, and no one was willing to submit to anyone else. If they couldn't argue, they would fight. It was unknown who took off the boots on his feet first and threw them out. The next moment, the room immediately erupted into a scene of hand-to-hand combat. "Lord Cabby, Lord Cabby, this is bad. Stop fooling around. Lord Cabby is dead." The elven priest in charge of taking care of Cabby bent down, only to find that the #1 gnome of the Crimson family had stopped breathing, taking his last breath. "All right, that's enough, you ugly fellows. Leave Lord Cabby with his last bit of dignity. If you want to quarrel, Go to the hall outside. Now all of you get out." The gnome Magus Loke, who had been watching coldly from the side, finally stood up in anger. With a tap of the staff in his hand, a dazzling elemental halo encircled his body, intimidating the group of gnomes who had been grabbing at each other's noses and biting each other's arms. "Let's all leave." The Blackwing leader stood up as well. "Let's discuss how to arrange Lord Cabby's funeral first. The rest can be discussed later." With that, he took the lead and walked out of the room. The rest of the gnomes looked at each other and could only release their arms and legs in anger. They tidied up their clothes and walked out of the room one after another. In the blink of an eye, only the elven priest, the Magus Loke, and the gnome Great Sage Cabby were left in the room. "My lord, aren't you going?" The elven priest looked at Loke curiously. Loke shook his head, not replying to her. Instead, he bowed respectfully to a corner of the room. "Lady Mary, I've chased them away, as per your orders." Lady Mary? The Blood Queen Mary, who controlled the enormous Crimson family and practically ruled over the central part of the continent? The Grade 1 elven priest could not help but widen his eyes, staring blankly at the beautiful and delicate figure that slowly appeared out of thin air. Just from appearance alone, nobody could tell that Mary had an extraordinary and terrifying identity. Even more so, nobody could tell that she was actually a super powerful being whose name would cause one's heart to tremble in fear. This was a young and beautiful girl with slender limbs and an unparalleled beauty. Her skin was spotlessly white and flawless, her features so exquisite that they could steal one's soul. Her small red lips were tightly pursed, and the corners of her mouth always held a faint smile that would intoxicate one's mind. Her youthful and fiery body was even more eye-catching. Her curvy body, which was wrapped under the hollowed-out dragon skin soft armor, revealed a large area of snow-white chest muscles and two plump hemispheres. On her back, a pair of similarly exquisite black bat wings gently flapped, accentuating the wild beauty and alluring allure of the girl before them. As soon as Mary's figure emerged from the void, her gaze fell on the old and decayed Cabby, who was lying on the bed and could no longer be seen. She quietly floated above Cabby and looked down at its body. No one knew what she was thinking. "Looks like Lady Mary is here to bid farewell to Cabby." The goblin wizard Loke could not help but guess. He even gave the elven priest a look, indicating for them to leave this place to Lady Mary. However, the elven priest evidently could not endure the faint scent of blood lingering around Mary's body, her entire body going limp. Not to mention walking, even moving a little finger was so difficult. Grade 1 and the peak of Grade 4. The difference between the two was too great. It was so great that even if Mary retracted her energy aura, the elven priest would instinctively feel fear and cower in fear. As if she had seen the most terrifying predator in the world, the elven priest's soul was already numb, her flesh and blood stiff, unable to move an inch. If she stayed by Mary's side for too long, she might even be scared to death. "You don't have to leave, just stay here." Mary's voice, filled with endless temptation, suddenly rang in the room. She extended her hand, and a faint soul shadow floated out of Cabby's body. The soul of an ordinary being would disperse very quickly after death. However, Cabby had reached the peak of Grade 2 before his death, which was why his soul shadow was much clearer and more tenacious than others. After crawling out of the body, Cabby's soul stood in the air in a daze, only recognizing Mary after a moment of absent-mindedness. "Lady Mary, I can't take it anymore. I have to leave you soon. Cabby bids you farewell here." Cabby's soul knelt in midair and kowtowed to Mary a few times, sobbing, "Lady Mary, it's my honor to be able to meet you and Lord Grimm. The next time you see Lord Grimm, please remember to bid him farewell for me." Hearing those words, Mary could not help but sigh faintly. "Looks like you're destined to be lucky for the rest of your life. I finally understand why that bastard suddenly gave me such a good thing. If you're lucky." Having said that, Mary took out an item from her bosom and tossed it in front of Cabby's soul. It was a ball of golden light, so beautiful that it could take one's breath away, and within it was a gorgeous golden thread. For some unknown reason, when the goblin wizard Lok's eyes fell on this thread, his breathing suddenly stopped. His entire body suddenly tensed up, and his mind and soul were trembling and agitated. Get it, get it, get it. Lok's entire spirit desired to obtain this golden thread. Fortunately, he still had his intelligence, and he used all his strength to stop himself from acting impulsively. What was that? How could it be so enticing? Chapter 1489. Mary could not help but sigh as she watched the alluring divinity roaming within the golden light. You've lucked out, Brad. Come back to life. With a point of her slender finger, the divinity immediately entered Cabby's soul shadow. As if a sun had been shoved into his soul, Cabby, who had been on the brink of death a moment ago, as if a slight breeze could scatter his soul, suddenly burst into a blinding radiance. With divinity as its foundation, the soul that had been fragmented was once again whole. Even some of the soul fragments that had scattered were drawn out of the void by a mysterious force, fusing into the soul shadow that was emitting a mysterious aura. Soon after, the soul shadow returned to its dead and decaying body under the guidance of its spirit and flesh. Where the golden light shone, the withered body that had lost all moisture was once again full and clean. Powerful and exuberant life force surged in Cabby's thin and withered body, his soul emitting a holy and pure radiance that cleansed the body that had fallen into depravity. His cracked and wrinkled skin became smooth and flat once more, while the dull surface of his body began to shine with fluorescence that was filled with life and strength. His skin, flesh, bones, and even the blood that flowed endlessly in his body became almost transparent, emitting a holy radiance that made others want to worship him. Holy Spirit. The elven priestess who had been watching from the sidelines could not help but cry out in surprise. In the elven books she had read, the elven gods would sometimes bestow divine blessings to certain believers, turning them into saints with holy powers. These fellows who had some of the characteristics of gods were called Holy Spirits. It was said that only the most devout believers could be turned into Holy Spirits by the gods after going through many trials. Holy Spirits, on the other hand, could also represent the gods and become the God spokesperson in the mortal world. They were also the gods' main force in spreading the gods' teachings and expanding the number of believers. Hence, in the eyes of the elven priestess, what she was seeing was no less than a god bestowing divinity and turning them into a great Holy Spirit. However, on one side was the terrifying Blood Queen, while on the other side was a lowly green-skinned gnome. Such a careless and casual scene completely subverted everything she knew. The elven priestess hurriedly closed her eyes, listening to the terrifying sound of a building collapsing somewhere in her heart. After all, Locke was already a knowledgeable and intelligent Tier 3 wizard. Although he hadn't recognized the divinity earlier, from Kobe's subsequent actions and the female elven priest's surprised exclamation, he was able to discern the origins of the golden thread that had entered Kobe's soul. Divinity. It was actually divinity. Such a thing had never existed in the Magus world and could only be obtained in the world of gods. He had only read about divinity in books. He knew that it could prolong one's life, improve one's physique, and strengthen one's soul. However, he also knew that the greatest benefit of divinity for mortals was divinity. It was said that 5 points of divinity could turn a mortal into a divine creature. This also meant that this lucky fellow would possess an immortal body and an indestructible soul. He would possess a body as pure and holy as a god's, and would no longer be affected by cold, heat, acid, curses, or aging. His soul would also be tough enough to withstand the attacks of a rank 3 death-type spell. So many benefits, and such a huge upgrade were the changes that divinity could bring. Just thinking about the mere rank 2 gnome Kobe being able to enjoy the blessings of divinity made Locke's heart roar and surge. He clutched at his heart and knelt down with all his might, using all his strength to stop his body from trembling. If that divinity was bestowed upon me, how much stronger would I be? Locke lowered his head deeply. While Locke and the female elf were having an intense internal conflict, the gnome Kobe had already stretched his body and climbed out of the luxurious bed. It was as if it had suddenly returned to its youth. Its body and appearance had returned to the most powerful and beautiful moment of its life, and it was firmly solidified. Moving his little arms and legs, Kobe felt the explosive power and inexhaustible energy in his body. He finally raised his head and asked curiously, "Master Mary, what is this thing that you've given me? It's really useful. I actually came back to life." "Umph." Mary snorted and said crisply, "Since you're alive, help me manage those gnomes and make them more obedient. Remember, this one point of divinity can only allow you to live for 100 years. Work hard for me, and if you perform well, I'll continue to bestow you with divinity." "Yes, yes, yes." Kobe will go and discipline those disobedient fellows. Kobe was so excited that he jumped up and down. When he raised his head again, Mary's figure had already disappeared without a trace. After sensing that Mary had left, Locke, who was kneeling on the ground, stood up and congratulated her with a smile. "Congratulations, Lord Kirby. You've actually been bestowed divinity and will soar to the skies from now on." In the past, Locke had relied on his status as a rank 3 magus, and even when Kobe was alive, he was arrogant and untamed. Now, however, he was so courteous and even had a hint of servility. Kobe was slightly taken aback, but he ran over and grabbed Wizard Locke's hand, asking excitedly, "Lord Locke, you're the most knowledgeable, so you must know about divinity. Why don't you tell me now? What is divinity? Let's talk as we walk." "You'd better show yourself as soon as possible, or else who knows what they'll do." Sensing the divine power emanating from Cabby's body at such a close distance, even Locke, who was a rank higher than Cabby, felt his hands and feet bound as he felt the pressure of being shrouded by it. Locke could not help but sigh inwardly. Casting pearls before swine. How good would it be if I had this bit of divinity? But from this point alone, he could tell what kind of position Kobe held in the hearts of the 2 Crimson rulers. Looks like I'll have to build a good relationship with Kobe in the future, within the Magus Hall. A heated argument was going on in full swing. Spittle and leather boots flew everywhere. Reasoning and fists were used at the same time. All the goblins used 2 million of their passion to greet their political enemies, trying their best to get votes for their own candidates. However, just as everyone was bickering and throwing punches and kicks, a pair of golden boots that were embedded with all kinds of gems and exuded a luxurious and flashy aura flew out and hit the forehead of the leader of the Goblin Consortium, who was sitting on the chairman's throne and gesticulating with his fingers and salivating all over. With a cry of agony, the plutocrat leader was smashed to the ground. However, it immediately got up, picked up the golden boot, and roared, "Which bastard plotted against me? It's me." A familiar voice suddenly sounded from outside the hall. The goblins who were fighting in the hall suddenly stopped and turned to look at the entrance. There 2 goblins walked in hand, seeming to be very intimate. It's Lord Locke." Then, "Who's the other goblin?" Inexplicably, a question arose in the goblins' minds. Perhaps the new goblins had never seen Cabby in his younger days, but there were a few old goblins present. They all exclaimed in shock, pointing at the young and handsome goblin as if they had seen a ghost. Their mouths made strange noises, but they did not know what to say. "Kobe. He's Lord Kobe." Finally, an old gnome exclaimed in surprise. It was as if a bone-chilling gust of wind had blown through the hall, and all the goblins froze. Kobe held Locke's hand and passed through the crowd with a cold smile on his face, walking towards the chairman's throne at the top of the hall. All the gnomes blocking its way felt a cold and intimidating aura, and they couldn't help but give way to it. Kobe walked to the front of the throne and kicked away the stunned plutocrat leader. He sat down on the throne and faced the goblins who were looking at each other, saying coldly, "Thanks to Lady Mary's grace, I've been revived. From now on, I have the final say here." If anyone has any objections, step forward now. The Grade 3 Goblin Wizard Locke stood beside the throne and tapped the staff in his hand. An invisible ripple swept through all the goblins. Only then did the goblins digest this terrifying and unbelievable news. They all ran back to their original positions and sat obediently like elementary school students who had made a mistake. Meanwhile, the corporate head who had been kicked crawled over to Cabby like a maggot and respectfully raised the golden boot above his head. His entire body was shaking like a sieve. The believers of the Goblin Salvation Society all rushed forward and knelt in front of Kobe, chanting slogans such as "Miracle" and "Long live Kobe." The atmosphere in the hall was instantly turned around. No one cared about the goblins' farce. However, information about divinity spread like a plague. In less than an hour, all the higher-ups of the Crimson family had heard of this almost comical news. In less than a day, all the Grade 4 Magi in the Central Continent had heard of this shocking news. That willful vampire sorceress, Lady Mary, who was known as the Blood Queen, had extravagantly used divinity to save a Grade 2 goblin. To be honest, the first thing that came out of the Grade 4 Magi's mouth when they heard of this news was damn. Their first reaction was that she was crazy. However, more Magi were curious about how much divinity Mary had. Maybe they could trade for some. Chapter 1490. By the time Grimm returned to Boulder Castle, he was no longer a nobody. It seemed that the results of the previous battle had spread. He and Antuso had worked together to kill the clone of a god with intermediate divine force. This news had spread inexplicably through some unknown channel. For a time, there was an endless stream of great wizards who came to visit and recruit him. Grimm could only use healing as an excuse to go into seclusion. This was the only way to stop their enthusiasm. At first, Grimm was a little puzzled about this, but after a little probing, he understood the reason. The wizards and orc gods had been at a stalemate for so long that both sides were familiar with each other. If you attacked my resource plane, I'd send someone to defend it. If I sent someone else to attack your faith plane, I'd force you to defend it as well. The two sides fought back and forth in this vast starfield, and it was hard to tell who would come out on top. Under normal circumstances, the combat power of both sides in a certain area was usually about the same. Many times, the outcome of a battle was decided by the individual strength and coordination of the two sides. Generally speaking, the wizards were more flexible, and they could use all kinds of strange spells and sinister methods. More importantly, the wizards would fight with their true bodies, and they could fully unleash the power of their equipment and spells. Although the orc gods had a high probability of fighting with their true bodies, to make up for the lack of combat power, there were still quite a few god clones on the battlefield. Although many of them were just the clones of gods, their basic combat power was not weak at all. Apart from the divine domain that they controlled, these god clones also had common divine spells that all gods could use: divine force shields, divine force shockwaves, energy blasts. The divine force shields were also called invincible by the wizards. While they were active, almost all magic and physical attacks were ineffective against the god's true body. They could only rely on saturated attacks to exhaust the divine force on the shield, and only then could they continue to harm the god's true body. With this life-saving method, the god's avatar would be able to gain an advantage in the battle against the Grand Wizard sect. If the situation was bad, they could just run with the divine force shields, and the wizards would definitely be like dogs try to bite tortoises. If the avatars of the gods had the upper hand in the battle, they could use their divine shields to resist the attacks of a group of wizards and turn the tide of the battle into a true victory. It was precisely because the gods had such a clear advantage that this battle had become so long and drawn out. Most of the battles were won by the gods' high-level powers, which were only used as covert protection. The true focus was on the various planes fighting and defending. On the Magi's side, more and more resource planes were destroyed, and the faction strength would gradually weaken. On the Orc God side, the planes of faith were destroyed one by one, and the followers of the Orc God were massacred in large numbers. The power of faith they could obtain was also greatly reduced. The reason why the orc divine system was able to resist the siege of over 100 great wizards with less than 20 gods was because of their powerful individual strength and the divine clones that could command them with ease. Because of this, most of the time, wizards could only rely on their advantage in numbers to offset the power of the orc gods. Under such circumstances, it was almost impossible to successfully trap and kill a god's clone on the battlefield. If Grimm did not have the strange devouring ability of the devouring demonic fish, he might be able to defeat Hall's doppelganger easily, but it would be even more difficult to kill it. It could be said that the number of god clones that could kill a god's doppelganger during the long war between the orc divine system and the Magi faction did not exceed 2 digits. Even in the worst-case scenario, the doppelgangers that had nowhere to run would choose to self-destruct and use their godhead fragments to escape. They would never give their enemies a chance to kill them all in one fell swoop. Therefore, Grimm's great success was not because of anything else, but because of his terrifying stomach that could devour anything. The great wizards that came after hearing about Grimm's devouring demonic fish were obviously targeting Grimm's innate ability and were prepared to work with him to hunt down the lone god's doppelgangers. However, Grimm knew that such a sneak attack would only be effective on the first try. Once the orcs were on guard, it would be extremely difficult to achieve the same result again. In any case, however, Grimm's name had spread far and wide. He was now quite famous among the Tier 5 great wizards in Boulder Castle. Half a year later, inside a secret witchcraft room, a 10-meter-tall flame giant sat quietly on the floor. A strange bead, burning with golden flames, hovered in front of him. A thin stream of crimson flames shot out from the bead and pierced into his forehead. 2 completely different forces were riding on the fire chain. The divine fire bead emitted a tame golden force that contained a holy aura that could burn the heavens and destroy the earth, yet purify everything. Looking at its nature and form, it actually bore a slight resemblance to the divine power of fire. What gushed out from Grimm's body was a colorless and transparent flame. It was violent and crazy, filled with an aura of destruction. It was the 2 strange laws of fire that he had mastered. These 2 forces mixed and harmonized on the fire chain. Many times, due to their different natures, they would collide and destroy each other. Fine cracks appeared and disappeared around the fire chains. The energy waves generated by the collision were all absorbed by the plane void, which prevented the space from suffering irreversible structural damage. However, the more they collided, the more they were destroyed. There would always be traces of mutated flame energy left behind. The remnant flame energy had the characteristics of both the laws of fire and the divine power of fire, which was why it was so different from the rest. Grimm continued to cast spells, guiding the mutated flames into his right eye and successfully sealing them within. As more and more mutated flames gathered, Grimm's right eye became brighter and more piercing. At first glance, it was as if a small sun had been stuffed into Grimm's right eye. The golden light was dazzling, and the heat was oppressive. 5,000 degrees, 10,000 degrees, 20,000 degrees, 30,000 degrees. When the energy level reached 32,000 degrees, Grimm sensed the chip's warning. Only then did he stop casting spells and cut off the absorption of the mutated flames. Beep. The Eye of the Berserk has been created. Energy level 32,000 degrees. Once released, it will cause severe damage to low-grade rank 5 targets, moderate damage to mid-grade rank 5 targets, and mild threat to high-grade rank 5 targets. The mutated flame stored in the Eye of the Berserk will cause a certain amount of damage when released. Every release will require 15 days of recuperation before it can be used again. The Eye of the Berserk will be sealed by flames at all times, unable to see normally. Only after receiving the eye chip's notification did Grimm relax. Following the completion of the seal, the abnormality in Grimm's right eye gradually dissipated. Only a tiny flame rune slowly rotated in his black pupil. Sacrificing his right eye in exchange for a powerful flame attack, that could be released in battle. Grimm felt that it was worth it no matter how he looked at it. After all, on the battlefield, the avatars of the orc gods all possessed frightening battle strength. If he didn't have a powerful weapon that could suppress the battlefield, fighting with them would simply be a torture. Grimm's fire spells were not bad, but he lacked a partner that he could trust on the battlefield. Hence, once they entered a bitter battle, it was Grimm who would be chased around by the orc gods. To put it nicely, it was Grimm jumping around and kiting them. To put it bluntly, it was Grimm who was being chased around by them and could only run for his life. Although he had the rank 5 Remy as a helper, he was obviously a venom type and was not suitable as a meat shield. Hence, before the mid-rank 5 wizard beast was completed, Grimm had to think of a way to solve these problems on the battlefield. Continuing to study the teleportation method of rule fusion was one way, but preparing more suitable trump cards was another way. After half a year of preparation, Grimm had temporarily given up on the other fire spells and focused on the AI chip's data processing abilities, finally deducing the flame refraction spell. Just like that, apart from the critical flame strike and the ring of decay, Grimm now had a tier 5 fire spell that belonged solely to him, and it was an attack-type spell. Along with the one-time use Eye of the Berserk, this meant that Grimm had 4 trump cards that could decide the outcome of the battle. Furthermore, apart from being the strongest support tool, the upgraded Divine Fire Bead also had another unknown and strange use, and that was to absorb the power of faith. Absorbing the power of faith was a miraculous ability that only gods possessed. But now, the Vulcan orb that had fused with a fragment of Divine Spark of Fire had a similar mysterious ability. However, the power of faith it could absorb had to come from intelligent individuals who were devout believers of Grimm. It was through the Vulcan orb that Grimm discovered to his surprise that he had a small number of devout believers in a few planes, as well as thousands of ordinary believers. Perhaps they didn't worship Grimm as a god and blindly followed him. Instead, they only saw him as a role model to be respected and worshipped. Perhaps there were slight differences between the two, but the power of the spirit they gathered was essentially the same. What surprised Grimm even more was that not long after the Vulcan orb's upgrade, he actually sensed a devout believer in him in the Magus world. Chapter 1491. When Grimm returned to the duty hall, everyone's attitude towards him had changed slightly. Even the rank 6 wizard Gleason was looking at Grimm with a hint of approval and admiration. After all, Grimm was part of his team, and Grimm being able to kill a god's clone was something that even he felt proud of. The mana tide was coming to an end. Once the mana tide receded, the gaps in the planes that had been opened due to the mana tide would close up automatically. At that time, if they wanted to attack another plane, they would have to expend more effort to break through the barrier. Perhaps it was because of this that the battle between the Magi and the Orc gods became more and more intense. Both sides were attacking and defending in countless planes, and the frequency of battles between them became more frequent. As a result, the chances of the great Magi being mobilized also increased, and the casualties on both sides increased exponentially. In such a chaotic quagmire of war, the more powerful an individual was, the more spoils of war they could obtain. The Magi were frantically fighting for divine weapons, divinity, and divine power crystals. Some of the more powerful Magi were even able to extract the divine domains of the fallen gods and make them into magic weapons with special domain powers. At the same time, the gods were constantly hunting down the Magi. Whether it was the power of laws in the bodies of Magi of laws, the immortal bodies of Magi of anatomy, or the bloodline power of Magi bloodline, they were all top-grade resources. In the hands of the gods, they could be used to make high-grade divine weapons. In particular, the immortal souls of the great Magi were a necessary resource to make high-grade petitioners. The battle between the Magi and the Orc gods was more like a hunt between two different high-grade creatures. Only cannon fodder and low-grade subordinates would be used, and the ones who would benefit in the end would be the leaders or the core forces that controlled the development of the war. As a lone chess piece in the Magi camp, Grim had no one to rely on. If he wanted to survive the clash between the two great forces and successfully absorb the resources of the losers, he would need more effective trump cards. Fortunately, even if he was just a chess piece, he was still a very useful and superior chess piece. This way, he would not have to worry about being ruthlessly abandoned or exchanged by the leaders. As the end of the Magic Tide approached, the probability of the most intense battle between the Orc God system and the Wizard God system was also increasing exponentially. The battlefields in the various small and medium-sized dimensions began to strategically retract, and the gathered forces were slowly injected into the three large dimensions. It looked like they were going to turn those dimensions into dimensional battlefields and decide the outcome of the battle in one fell swoop. In this process, encounters, ambushes, offensive and defensive battles, sneak attacks, and counter-sneak attacks of all sizes were constantly taking place. The higher-ups of both sides were frequently mobilized, and the frequency and intensity of collisions were also slowly increasing. On the 5th day after Grimm returned to the guard hall, he received news that he was going to fight again. The mission this time was even simpler and more violent. A Tier 6 Great Sorcerer led a raid on an Orc temple in the Mutas Plain. It was the usual gathering of wizards and the usual long-distance teleportation across plains. When Grimm and the others teleported into Mutas Plain, they were greeted by a team of weary wizards, their bodies and equipment covered in dust and battle scars. This was a small call in the middle of a vast mountain range. At this moment, the curtain of the night was hanging low, and the sky was filled with stars. The team of wizards lit a bonfire and gathered in front of the exquisite and perfect teleportation formation, bowing as they awaited the arrival of the great sorcerers. Asterisk tong, tong, tong. Asterisk a series of teleportation lights resounded within the teleportation formation. In the blinding white light, illusory figures of different shapes and forms slowly appeared, gradually condensing into real bodies. As if sensing something that should not have appeared here, the consciousness of the plane slowly gathered its strength. The dark clouds in the sky were blown away by the whistling wind, and the bright moonlight shone through the peaks and impenetrable branches, landing on the bodies of the great sorcerers. For a moment, the moonlight was like blood, and the world was filled with killing intent. As soon as they completed the long-distance teleportation and stepped out of the teleportation formation, Grimm felt an overwhelming evil intent from the plane. It was as if the void around him had cracked open, and a shocking number of law chains stretched out from within, stretching straight towards Grimm's body. Grimm let out a muffled groan. A ball of dense red light gathered around his body and turned into a wriggling thread of law. It cut off the law chains that were extending towards him, preventing the planar law power from invading his body. Similar to Grimm, the other 5 great sorcerers, including the grade 6 sorcerer, also gathered special spells around them to resist the laws of this plane. However, the more they resisted, the more powerful the power of the plane's consciousness became. Like Grimm, a few law-defying sorcerers in the team who did not have great physiques began to show signs of strain. Fortunately, we did not fail. Greetings, my lords. Almost all the sorcerers gathered here were rank 4, and the only rank 3 was the rune formation master who had constructed the teleportation formation. Seeing that the great sorcerers had successfully arrived, the leader of the sorcerers hurriedly stepped forward and bowed. The rank 6 great sorcerer quickly stabilized his body and opened his eyes to scan the surroundings. He released his immense spiritual force, and everything within a 10-kilometer radius was under his control. You've all completed your mission well. Once we return, the headquarters will reward you greatly. It was no wonder that the Tier 6 great sorcerer would praise them so highly. They were able to infiltrate a medium-sized faith plane of the Orc gods with a team of less than 10 people, fight for 1,000 miles, and successfully find an earth vein node to set up a teleportation circle. No amount of praise or praise could be given to such a great achievement. My lord, this is the world map and the distribution of power. We've also marked out the location of the main shrine of the god of massacre as requested by the headquarters. Also, many groups of native orcs have been chasing us, and the two closest ones are less than 100 kilometers away. The leading sorcerer was obviously a smart and capable person, and he had completed his mission perfectly. Very good. The rank 6 great sorcerer was elated upon hearing this, and nodded. You don't have to risk your lives anymore. Stay here and guard this teleportation formation. You'll be able to move about freely in 7 days. Before we leave, we'll get rid of any threats in the surroundings. Having said this, the rank 6 great sorcerer took out a few small purple bottles from his pouch and tossed them to Grim and the rest, saying in a low voice, "Drink this. With this, as long as you don't overuse your strength, you won't have to endure the torment of the plane suppression." Grim took the purple bottle and used his thumb to open the small wooden stopper, immediately smelling the scent of a magic medicine. There was a small tube of dark-colored liquid in the purple bottle. The moment it came into contact with the aura of the outside world, it immediately boiled and became active. Beep. Initial analysis shows that the target is a rank 5 magic medicine. It contains the aura of the origin of the plane. After the host drinks it, the special aura of the plane will conceal the identity of an outsider, allowing the host to avoid the suppression of the will of the plane. The AI chip quickly projected the results of the test. Who would have thought that the headquarters would be able to develop such a magic medicine? Grim thought to himself as he raised his head and drank the potion. The moment the potion entered his stomach, an ancient aura unique to the orc plane emanated from his body. The laws of the plane that had wrapped around Grim immediately retreated. Even the will of the plane that had been suppressing the malice in his heart gradually dissipated. This is the world map. Memorize it. Sala, Colin, you two come with me to the orc temple. Grim, Rick, clean up the ants around the teleportation formation and meet up with us at the main shrine as soon as possible. Let's go. Having said this, the rank 6 great Magus Briar raised his hand and released a rank 6 storm giant. It lifted him and the other 2 great magi into the sky, and they flew towards a certain direction in the southwest. The sudden appearance of a few great magi in the Muta's plane had definitely alerted the orcs. However, the Magi's decisiveness in sending such a powerful force to attack the main shrine of the orc plane was obviously out of their expectations. As long as Grim and the others acted fast enough and attacked with enough force, the orc gods might not even have the time to descend before their foundation would be destroyed. Once the main shrine was breached, the orc gods would not be able to cross millions of miles to bite them no matter how much they hated them. Before coming here, the Magi headquarters had already investigated. The Muta's plane mainly worshipped the god of massacre, Garanakartas, and was one of the 7 important medium faith planes. Once this place was destroyed, Garanakartas' combat power would be greatly affected in the short term. This way, the rank 7 great magi would have a greater chance of winning against this rank 7 orc god of massacre. Seeing that the rank 6 great Magus Briar had left with his 2 companions, Grim could not help but look at the leading Magus. There are 2 groups of enemies chasing after us. One is a group of orcs from Pilbani City, led by a rank 4 berserker. They're in this direction. The Magus in the lead introduced as he pointed out their approximate location. The other is a powerful team sent from Stormcliff. The leader is a grade 4 tracker. Their position should be around here. The 2 groups of orcs definitely had a lot of rank 4 orcs, but to Grim and Rick, they were all ants. Which one do you choose? Grim smiled coldly without a care in the world. I'll choose the berserker. I hope it will satisfy me. Great Wizard Rick also smiled coldly. His entire body suddenly turned into a cloud of black smoke and burrowed into the ground, disappearing from the scene without anyone noticing. Grim did not say anything else, and his body suddenly turned into a ball of flames. With a bang, he appeared at the end of the horizon. Chapter 1492. This was a lively and noisy orc camp. Although night had already fallen, there were no signs of quiet sleep in the camp. The energetic orc warriors gathered around the bonfires, drinking hard liquor, slapping their chests or weapons, singing muffled ancient songs, laughing and cursing loudly. There was not the slightest hint of nervousness that came from a dangerous battle. However, in the center of the camp, in the largest cowhide tent, more than a dozen powerful orcs with cruel and tyrannical auras were gathered together, loudly arguing about something. At the top of the tent was an extremely muscular werewolf. He had two simple and long swords on his back, and he wore soft leather armor with special divine runes engraved on it. A necklace made of beast bones and sharp teeth hung around his neck. His knees, shoulders, and other parts of his body were covered with hard cowhide, covered with sharp thorns that were still wet with blood. Sitting beside him was a shaman with strange feathers all over his body. His nose and lips were pierced with terrifying beast teeth, and his body was covered with colorful germanium mud. To be able to sit in the tent, one had to be at least a grade 3 orc. All of them had great strength and sturdy bodies. Their dusty and scratched leather armors gave off an unconcealable aura of brutality. However, just as they were loudly debating on how to surround and annihilate the group of evil sorcerers hiding in the deep mountains, the orc shaman who had been quietly sitting at the side suddenly raised his head and looked into the depths of the mountains with a bewildered expression. Although orc shamans were few in number, they were the most respected in the orc tribes. They could communicate with the high and mighty orc gods through special sacrificial rituals, so they were the group of people who had the most say in the tribe's development and decisions. High Priest Sanger, did you discover something? The strongest werewolf in the main seat raised his hand to stop his subordinates from roaring and asked with a frown. Although he did not sense the specific situation, a chill from the bottom of his heart suddenly made him vigilant. He did not have divination skills, so naturally, he could not see the evil sorcerer's movements 100 miles away. However, with its strength at the advanced tier 4 stage, it was already qualified to come into contact with the illusory consciousness of the realm of existence. It was as if Mother Earth was sending him some kind of warning through this method. An unknown danger was approaching the team from outside of its perception. It's the invaders. Sange's ugly facial features were scrunched up. He was coughing violently, and his pure white eyes were filled with terror and fear. I don't know what they did, but they have angered Mother Earth. Mother Earth sent me a warning, telling us to escape immediately. Immediately, quickly. If we delay any longer, it will be too late. Are those invading wizards trying to ambush us? The werewolf leader was shocked. I don't think they can defeat us with their strength. Yes, let them come. We orcs have never been afraid of them. I'll wake those brats up and give them a head-on blow. A few orcs who had obviously lost their minds due to violence immediately started to clamor, looking as though they would rush up and kill any enemy that came their way. The entire tent immediately burst into an uproar. Shut up! Shut up! All of you, shut up! Listen, what's that sound outside? The werewolf leader suddenly pricked up his ears, his face showing that he was listening carefully. All the orcs quieted down and listened attentively. As expected, strange and continuous explosions suddenly came from afar, and they were getting closer and louder. Hearing this sound, the orc shaman suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body started to tremble uncontrollably. Enemy attack. Tong, 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 one by one, the orcs broke out of the cowhide tent and slowly rose into the sky. Although they did not know flying spells, nor did they have the support of divine spells, they could rely on their violent brute force and extremely sturdy bodies to temporarily overcome the gravity of the earth and achieve the effect of short-distance floating. More orc warriors came out of the tents that were full of patches, and they shouted as they picked up their weapons and looked at the sky where the explosions were coming from. There, at the end of the horizon, clusters of beautiful crimson flame halos were slowly spreading, as dazzling as the gigantic fireworks that were set off during a festival. However, looking at the order in which the fireworks appeared, they seemed to be heading straight for their camp. Grim rode the night wind and found the orc army without much effort. Compared to other magi, Grim's entrance was indeed too cool and fierce. The slowly blossoming path of flames behind him marked his flight path perfectly in the sky. Even if he was hundreds of miles away, he would still be able to see it clearly. However, with Grim's identity as a legendary rank 5 fire magus, there was no need for him to hide or be careful in this medium-sized Muta's plane. After appearing in the sky above the orc camp with a flame leap, Grim condensed his body and looked down at the dozens of powerful orcs, as well as the large group of orc warriors that were running and shouting below them. A bunch of ants. Grim's face revealed a fierce and resolute expression unique to Magi. With a raise of his hand, a wide meteor shower that could almost cover the entire orc camp appeared. Although Shurfeng's strength was limited to the Tier 4 standard, with his superior knowledge, techniques, and tier suppression, he didn't fear the dozen or so Tier 3 and Tier 4 orcs in the slightest. The meteor shower, which was at the pinnacle of the Fourth Order, arrived with a wave of his hand, instantly sweeping across the entire field of view. One after another, fireballs filled with flame energy and with traces of an inextinguishable aura fell from the sky like raindrops. Huge pillars of dust that were more than 10 meters tall were raised wherever they passed, turning into crimson rings of fire that slowly spread out and engulfed a large number of orc warriors. Be it the shock waves from the explosions of the fireballs or the beautiful rings of fire, they were extremely fatal to ordinary orc warriors. The sturdy armor and large shields that they were so proud of were as thin as a piece of mugwort in the face of the terrifying golden flames. Their strong and tall bodies were unable to withstand the terrifying burning of the flames. They cried and howled as they ran around in the fire. Only when the same flames gushed out from their pores did they fall to the ground like rotten wood, turning into a pile of charred and withered ashes. The cowhide tents, carriages, donkey carts, and tents were all set ablaze. The earth and sky were all set ablaze, and even the orcs in the world were set ablaze. There were 3,000 orcs in front of them, and their average strength was at the peak of rank 1. Even the entire Muta's plane, this was a formidable force. Even if it was thrown into another large plane, it would still be able to turn that place upside down and turn it upside down. However, in front of a legendary fire magus like Grim, they were just like a bunch of ants. Let alone retaliating, they could not even look at the light around him. Ordinary orcs could not retaliate, but that did not mean that the dozen or so orcs could not. Asterisk roar, asterisk roar. Deafening roars echoed as the dozen Beastman powerhouses took out their weapons and charged towards Grim from all directions. However, Grim's gaze swept past all the orcs and landed on the cowhide tents. The smell of divine spells. There's an orc shaman here? Grim did not hesitate to cast a spell. After 1 to 5 seconds of rapid casting, a mushroom-shaped molten core of fire rose up from within the cowhide tents. The life force of High Priest Sanger, who was secretly contacting the rear, weakened in an instant. If one spell couldn't kill it, let's add another one. Grim was about to continue casting, but the dozen or so orcs under the leadership of the werewolf leader had already rushed to his side. "You're courting death," Grim shouted, and the burning domain that he had not used for a long time enveloped an area of 1,000 meters around him in an instant. The orcs that had just charged into the sky were immediately engulfed in flames, and all the metal items in their hands and bodies became scalding hot. He felt as if he had been thrown into a blazing furnace. Not to mention fighting, even breathing had become painful and torturous. The Type 4 Beastmen were still able to muster their berserk force, barely managing to block the terrifying flames from reaching their bodies. However, half of the Grade 3 orcs did not even have the ability to block the flames. They were turned into human-shaped torches, screaming as they fell from the sky. "Kill him! Hurry up and kill him!" The Tier 4 orcs roared as they charged at Grim, gathering all sorts of power as they swung their weapons at him from all angles. The werewolf leader turned into a bolt of gray lightning, piercing through Grim's body and appearing in the sky behind him. Grim's body was immediately covered with 6 or 7 crisscrossing gray blades, and his entire body began to collapse. Hooray! Howl, you're the strongest. That's great. The few orcs who saw this scene immediately cheered. Only the werewolf leader who had killed the evil fire shaman did not have any joy in his eyes. He suddenly turned his head and shouted, "Hurry up and disperse." That's not his main body. However, the warning was too late. In the next second, Grimm's fire clone suddenly exploded, turning into a huge wave of flames that engulfed the surrounding orcs. Grimm's main body slowly emerged from the vast sea of flames on the ground, holding the orc shaman whose body was mostly burnt black. Chapter 1493. It only took Grimm a quarter of an hour to clear out the orc camp. Other than the werewolf leader and the 3 grade 4 orcs who had escaped with injuries, the rest of the orc warriors had all died on the spot. None of them survived. This was also because Grimm did not have much killing intent and was too lazy to chase after the orcs who had escaped. Otherwise, with the orcs' clumsy and laughably short legs, it was impossible for them to escape the pursuit of a legendary fire wizard. Although those guys had escaped death on the surface, their bodies had been tainted by the inextinguishable flame during the short battle. With the terrifying power of the inextinguishable flames, even if they had escaped, they would have to face the endless torment of the flames. Just the thought of that kind of life was extremely miserable. Grimm released his powerful mental strength and quickly scanned the entire battlefield. After confirming that he had not missed any worthy opponents, he turned around and rushed into the sky, flying into the distance. To Grimm, it only took him 7 or 8 leaps to traverse the vast plains that spanned hundreds of miles. As for the towering mountains and surging rivers, there were nothing more than slopes and small ditches in his eyes. Grimm turned into a ball of flames, exploding and reassembling in the sky. In the blink of an eye, he had already traversed thousands of miles, leaving behind only rings of flames that were slowly blooming behind him. Grimm's arrogant actions naturally attracted the attention of the orcs who passed by along the way. Ordinary beastmen couldn't detect his presence at all. When they heard the strange explosion of the flames and rushed out, they could only see beautiful flowers of fire slowly blooming in the sky. They didn't know that Grimm was already hundreds of miles away. However, along the way, there were always some orc tribes that were too arrogant and unruly. They rushed into the sky to stop this mysterious enemy, but before they could clearly see Grimm's appearance, they were blasted out of the sky by a terrifying fireball. Even a grade 4 orc would find it hard to defend against Grimm's inextinguishable flames. If they were careless, the inextinguishable flames would invade their soul and burn them to death. Grimm didn't feel like arguing with these beastman powerhouses, nor did he expect to obtain any valuable loot from them. Just like that, he barged his way through the densest territory of the beastmen and rushed towards the main shrine located in the Central Mountain Range. After entering the Central Mountain Range, the mountains they saw along the way were all towering into the clouds, strange and precipitous. Between the undulating mountain ranges, there were orc tribes scattered all over the place like stars in the sky. Based on Grimm's quick scan, there were at least 300,000 orcs in this area. 300,000. This was already a very shocking number. One had to know that the Beastmen tribes had never produced anything. Every single one of them was a soldier, and they relied on enslaving other weaker races to provide them with food and various living necessities. Among the Beastmen, the green-skinned Beastmen were the majority, and there were also some powerful Minotaurs, werewolves, eaglemen, bearmen, and other tribes. On the whole, the Beastmen were a group of crude and stupid humanoid beasts that did not have any mercy or compassion for other races. They were violent and cruel and would rather act than think. They would rather fight than argue. They were typical muscular people, and the kind that had muscles growing out of their skulls. Perhaps it was because of their purity and violence that the orc god, Ah Fu, had chosen them as a barbaric race under his protection. They continued to expand their territory, invading one elegant and noble civilized country after another. Due to the severe clash of aesthetic standards, The relationship between the orc gods and the elven gods was extremely tense, to the point that they had become mortal enemies. The orc gods did not have good relations with the humans, sea folk, dwarves, and other tribes of the underworld. They were too bloodthirsty and thirsty for battle, to the point that they did not have any allies or friends in the world of gods. There were only present enemies and future enemies. As long as the land was ruled by the orcs, even the most beautiful flowers of civilization would wither. In the end, all that was left was a group of slaves living in cruel oppression and slavery, as well as primitive tribes whose social forms were becoming more and more primitive. Furthermore, the orcs were too fertile. If they did not use war to deplete a portion of their population, no physical plane would be able to withstand these terrifying creatures that could fight, eat, and reproduce like locusts. According to the normal process of a dimensional war, if the wizards wanted to invade the Mutas plane, the first step would be to send people to infiltrate the interior of the plane and set up a stable and secure forward base. They would then gradually expand the scale of the base, build wizard pagodas, and build dimension gates to welcome more and more powerful wizard troops into the plane. From cleansing the various orc tribes, slowly nibbling away at the foundation of the orcs' faith, to invading the orc kingdom and destroying the orc main divine temple. This process could take up to several hundred years. Of course, the more resources and troops were invested, the faster the process would progress. However, this was directly proportional to the loss of a large number of wizard troops, as well as the long wait time. This was why the wizard headquarters would often try to carry out such a strategic sneak attack. As long as they could destroy the main divine temple before the orc deity sent his clone down, the subsequent dimensional war would be a one-sided massacre. Without the orc deity restraining them, the powerful orcs within the plane would not be able to resist the ferocious wizards. Therefore, Grimm's group of 5 did not waste any time at all in other regions. Once they arrived, they went straight for the root of the problem, using the fastest and most direct method to launch a fierce attack on the orc main divine temple. The orc main divine temple was located at the peak of a tall, majestic mountain. There were 4 levels of platforms in front of the mountain, and a wide path formed by tens of thousands of steps for the orcs to ascend and descend. Every platform had an orc camp of up to 1,000 people, and those who could be selected were all powerful orcs from all over the plane. On the peak, the orc main divine temple was tens of meters tall, towering majestically. Judging from its appearance and design, it seemed as if it had been dug out from a mountain rock, fused into a single entity. At this moment, within the main hall of the orc main divine temple, many orc tribe leaders had gathered, solemnly watching a few orc priests who were dancing and singing around a huge brazier. What was burning in the brazier was not charcoal, but a pile of malevolent and terrifying skulls. From the looks of it, these skulls belonged to humans, elves, dwarves, dragons, and many other intelligent beings. The flames burning in the brazier were not the usual scarlet, but a cold and sinister green flame. Under the burning of the pale green flame, the upper and lower jaws of those strange skulls couldn't help but tremble, letting out shrill howls that could make one's hair stand on end. Their souls would fly out from time to time, carrying the most vicious and terrifying curses towards the surrounding orc priests. Unfortunately, their souls could not leave the area enveloped by the green light of the brazier. Before they could escape by half a foot, they were dragged back into the brazier by a strange, invisible force. These were the skulls of the enemy tribes that the orcs had killed or captured before they unified the Muta's dimension, using the cursed brazier to burn their souls day and night, making them wail in pain in front of the orc god for tens of thousands of years. This was also the most terrifying way for the orcs to punish their enemies. But today, an even more terrifying enemy had appeared in the Muta's dimension. This also forced the great orc god of massacre, Garen Akatas, to issue an oracle, issuing the highest level of danger alert to all the Muta's orcs. He allowed his subordinates to perform a sacrificial dance in front of the cursed brazier, throwing the skulls of the strong enemies they had just killed into the brazier. The orc priest, the respectable Ormus, was piously kneeling in front of a 30-meter-tall statue of Garen, praying silently. Compared to the other orc warriors, Ormus did not have a tall and sturdy physique. Instead, he seemed a little thin and weak. However, he wore a hat with iron thorns on top of the green hair on his head. A series of spikes on the inside of the hat pierced into his skull. But strangely, not a single drop of blood flowed out. On his ugly and flabby face, one could vaguely see crisscrossing shallow scars, and in the depths of his deep and serene eyes, there are even ghastly green flames burning, causing every living being that looked at him to feel their minds tremble, as if their souls had left their bodies. The enemies are coming. Get all the orcs to prepare for battle. Enemies? High Priest, haven't we already forced the wizards who invaded the dimension to Mount Hagrid? Did they sneak out? Idiot, it's not them. They're just here to steal our dimension's waymark. The great god Garen has already given me an oracle. A group of terrifying great wizards have broken into the Muta's dimension. Their goal is most likely to ambush the great god Garen's main temple. So, immediately awaken the Earth Prophet and release the Dark Demon Dragon. We have to fight the enemies to the end. Only when the great god Garen has completely descended will we be truly safe. Go quickly. As the High Priest Ormus roared at the top of his lungs, the group of orc leaders ran out of the main hall one after another, splitting up and rushing to various places on the peak. At this moment, the tall and mighty Garen statue in the main temple suddenly emitted a golden light that illuminated the entire sky. Immediately, amidst a series of strange, snapping sounds, the god statue suddenly woke up and began to move its body slowly. God's descent. The great god Garen has descended in advance. The high priest's heart suddenly tightened. He rushed to kneel in front of the huge god statue in a few steps and shouted loudly, "Great god Garen, why have you descended in advance?" The huge god statue was slowly coming to life under the golden light. Its body, armor, face, and weapons had all changed into the unique form of the legendary god of massacre. Moreover, it directly ignored Ormus' question and raised its head. A pair of eyes that were like searchlights stared straight at the distant sky. All of you should also prepare for battle. The enemies are already here. I will block the strongest few for all of you. All of you must protect the temple and not let them destroy or desecrate this temple. After saying that, the huge god statue pulled out a huge double-sided axe from its back and rushed out of the temple with earth-shattering steps. Chapter 1494. When Grimm arrived at the central mountain range, the battle had already begun. That 30-meter-tall, giant metal statue had completely become the god of massacre Garen's divine soul carrier, and was currently using his violent and ferocious attacks to drive the great wizards led by Gabriel into a state of disarray, leaving them in a sorry state. A few familiar figures turned into streams of light and danced in the sky, unable to get close to the main god's temple at all. Grimm's arrival had obviously attracted the attention of everyone on the battlefield. As soon as he stopped and began to scan the entire battlefield, the Grand Sorcerer Briel sent a message to him. "We'll hold off Garen's descending projection. You go destroy the main god's temple." Grimm glanced at the Garen statue. The chip's power level was actually as high as level 6. This obviously shocked him, and he did not dare to go near the main battlefield that was overflowing with terrifying energy. All right, since he did not dare to touch level 6 Garen's projection, he would go to the main god's temple and try his luck. Grimm silently comforted himself as he suddenly exploded into a ball of fireworks. In the next second, he appeared directly above the main god's temple. This mission might be a little easier. However, before Grimm could finish his thoughts, a strange feeling of dizziness enveloped his body. He was like a fiery meteor that had lost control, falling from the sky and crashing heavily on the huge square in front of the main god's temple. Fortunately, Grimm had already transformed into a body of flames and did not have the fatal weakness of a human. Therefore, when he turned into a 10-meter-tall, giant flaming man and climbed out of the pit of fire. The injuries on his body were not considered serious. However, as soon as Grimm stood up, he frowned. On his body, he saw a layer of khaki-colored magic halo. The dense and fluctuating rule aura on it was so familiar, so despicable. Gravity halo. Damn it, so it's this kind of power. Just as Grimm discovered the reason why he lost control of his body, his expression suddenly changed. With a bang, the flames scattered in all directions, and only then did he dodge a giant rock hand that reached out from the ground. Thump! The huge rock hand slammed heavily on the stone plaza, immediately shattering the bluestone. A huge palm print that was 2 meters deep and 30 meters wide appeared on the ground. The next moment, Grimm appeared in the plaza 300 meters away. When he turned around, he saw a giant rock giant crawling out of the ground. Was it the giant rock giant, the rock crush walker, or the earth prophet? Grimm's mind spun rapidly. The AI chip projected rays of blue light, quickly gathering information on the other party. It was a 30-meter tall stone creature with a humanoid body and 4 limbs. However, it wasn't made of flesh and blood, but of massive, heavy steel rock. Its short and thick stone legs, which required several people to wrap their arms around, were densely covered with huge steel rocks of various shapes. And from the cracks of the steel rocks, circles of khaki-colored magic halos could be seen. In addition to its terrifying weight and strength, this giant rock creature's body was also overflowing with frightening Earth origin energy. Damn it, this rock creature also has the ability to cast spells. It's an Earth prophet. Grimm's expression immediately turned gloomy. Out of all the Earth elemental creatures, the Earth prophet was undoubtedly the most difficult to deal with. Although the other Earth elemental creatures were similarly huge and indestructible, apart from a few types of Earth abilities, they did not have the ability to cast spells. Hence, when dealing with such a huge creature, as long as one could kite it well, Grimm would be able to kill as many of them as he wanted. However, this was useless against the Earth prophet. The Earth prophet had the terrifying Earth origin energy, which was also known as the Law of Earth by Magi. They could use the gravity halo to firmly bind their enemies to the ground. This way, they could avoid the awkwardness of their enemies flying in the blue sky and not being able to reach them. Their natural slow spells, earthquake spells, earth-shattering spells, and other spells were also the natural enemy of all living things. Once one was hit by the Earth origin energy, they would be bound to the ground, and no one would be able to resist the Earth prophet's terrifying giant rock hand. However, Grimm was a little unlucky. He had actually been hit by the Earth prophet's gravity halo. This Earth prophet was also a grade 5 elemental creature. Its gravity halo was enough to suppress Grimm to the ground, making it impossible for him to return to the sky. Go to hell, evil Magus! The Earth prophet let out a muffled roar from within its thick rock body. It strode to Grimm's side, raised its huge right foot, and stomped down viciously. Asterisk whoosh, asterisk an evil gust of wind blew. The Earth prophet's every move was accompanied by a grade 2 earthquake spell. Normal creatures would have a hard time standing still after getting close to it, let alone fighting it. Asterisk bang. Asterisk Grimm's body turned into flames that scattered in all directions, escaping to different areas. Unfortunately, no matter how he disassembled his body, the detestable gravity halo still lingered around him, preventing him from flying more than 3 meters above the ground. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the ground cracked again, and another huge pit appeared in the square. Facing such a powerful opponent, Grimm didn't dare to delay any longer. The scattered fireballs transformed into 4 identical flame giants. The 4 flame giants chanted a spell at the same time. A moment later, 4 huge fireballs the size of millstones bombarded the Earth prophet's body from 4 directions. Asterisk bang 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 bang. Asterisk a series of explosions rang out, and a small portion of the Earth prophet's body was engulfed by the scorching flames. Under the terrifying heat of the flames, the Earth prophet's body began to turn red and soften, turning into semi-liquid lava that flowed down. However, with the Earth Prophet's thick and sturdy body, even if the flames burned for 15 minutes, it would not be able to burn through the 3-meter-thick rock armor. As such, the Earth Prophet forcefully withstood the scorching flames and turned around, running with large strides to the side of the flame giant closest to him. He waved his hand, and an earth-shattering rain of rocks and earth spears landed on the flame giant's body. Grimm's brows furrowed, and his expression gradually turned serious. The flame clone did not have the time to escape, and was killed by his opponent. Although it was only a fire clone, it had 30% of Grimm's fire spell damage, and it had also mastered all of the fire spells. Under normal circumstances, it should not have been killed so easily by relying on flame leap or flame teleportation. Grimm's expression darkened, and he asked in a muffled voice, "Aye, Chip, what's going on?" Beep. Before Flame Clone 1 was attacked, it detected the invasion of the slowing halo. Then why was I fine just now? Beep. The main body has the protection of the Book of Darkness, and can resist the invasion of the Law of Earth. The Flame Clone is only a projection of the main body's power. In order to resist the slowing halo, it will need to use the Law of Fire. Damn it, this Earth Prophet is really hard to deal with, Grimm grumbled, but he could only extend his power of the Law of Fire to the remaining 2 flame clones, protecting them from head to toe. Asterisk dong, dong, dong. Asterisk amidst the tremors, the Earth Prophet rushed towards one of the flame clones while brandishing terrifying earth spears, shrouding the flame clone in a large patch of yellow dust. A clumsy and valiant rock giant and a group of lively flame giants began a fight in the huge stone plaza. However, at this moment, Wizard Rick, who was on a special mission just like Grimm, finally arrived on the battlefield. Looking at the Rank 6 main battlefield and Grimm, who was trapped on the stone plaza, Wizard Rick laughed coldly. He turned into a cloud of black smoke and rushed towards the Orc main shrine. For what he could sense, there were only a bunch of Rank 4 wizards left in the main shrine. Obviously, dealing with them was much easier than dealing with Rank 5 and 6th God projections and elemental monsters. As a result, Rick launched an attack on the main temple without hesitation. However, a terrifying dragon aura that sent chills down his spine seeped out of the void when he arrived near the main divine hall. In the next second, an abnormally sinister and terrifying black dragon head appeared in the void. It opened its pitch-black mouth and spat out a 2-meter-thick black dragon flame that was filled with a dense dark aura, dark demon dragon. Rick was able to tell the details of the other party at a glance, and he was immediately scared out of his wits. With a bang, his body exploded and dissipated into countless black smoke balls. Only then did most of them escape from the black dragon flames. The black smoke that remained in the black dragon flame did not even last a finger. It turned into a shrieking soul shadow and dissipated into the air. Rick, who had reassembled his body 1,000 meters away, spat out a mouthful of black blood. He raised his head and looked at the dark dragon head with eyes full of hatred and fear. The dark demon dragon was an abnormally powerful evil dragon. They were born with the dark dragon flame, which had both corrosive and burning effects. Their original form was a magic dragon, so their magic resistance was also astonishingly high. Coupled with the dragon's unique draconic aura and dark physique, they were famous even among all the evil dragons. One of the main reasons why Rick was so afraid of the dark demon dragon was that he also had a dark physique. In a situation where the source of power was similar, the damage he could deal to the dark demon dragon was very little compared to other lineages. To put it bluntly, in front of a rank 5 dark demon dragon, even 3 Ricks combined might not be a match for it. Chapter 1495. The battle was extremely fierce. Every single one of the participants had the terrifying power to destroy the world and overturn rivers and seas. The level of energy released by every single one of their movements was so high that it left one speechless. The energy waves that spread out from the battlefield could cause a huge earthquake if they landed in the surrounding area. Even so, the strength of the enemy was not enough to scare the fierce orc warriors. Everywhere in the central mountain range, fierce orc warriors madly rushed towards the orc main temple, trying their best to get close to the battlefield. They used their crude metal axes and bone spears to attack these foreign sorcerers. Before the weapons they threw could even get close to the sorcerers, they would be shattered by the shockwaves. Their bodies would also explode into clouds of blood in the aftermath of the battle. However, such a tragic ending did not deter the brave orcs. More and more powerful orc warriors came from afar and joined the ranks of the sorcerers. Because of this, they had no choice but to send out a great sorcerer from the main battle group to kill these fearless orc ants. Grim was imprisoned in the rock square by the Earth Prophet, and Rick was chased by the dark demon dragon in the sky. On the battlefield, the only place that could be diverted was the main battlefield. In a fit of rage, the Tier 6 Great Sorcerer Gabriel summoned a Tier 6 Storm Giant and a Tier 6 Wind of Death to surround Garen's projection. Meanwhile, the other Tier 5 Great Sorcerer Sala left the battlefield and charged towards the Orc main temple. Loud prayers could be heard coming from within the temple, and a unique blood-colored halo of the blood sacrifice ceremony could be seen shining from within. Obviously, the green-skinned orcs were holding a god's descent ceremony to guide the god of massacre Garen to descend more clones or projections. After all, this was the orc main temple. As long as they were given enough time, it would not be rare for them to gather a group of orc petitioners. Therefore, everything hinged on the importance of speed in war. Just as the great sorcerer Sala rushed towards the main temple, more than 10 orc powerhouses with their bodies radiating a bloody red light rushed out. Regardless of how strong their original bodies were before, at this moment, they were pushed to the limits of the plane by the petitioners who possessed them, the pinnacle of level 4. Those rank 4 beastmen experts might be able to endure this terrifying increase in strength, but those rank 3 beastmen would have their skin and internal organs ruptured by the terrifying strength. Their bodies were bathed in blood. Their eyes, skin, teeth, arms, everything that was exposed was blood red. The muscles on their bodies bulged, and white steam spurted out of their nostrils. Waving their crude weapons, they roared and blocked Sala's way. From the looks of it, even if the great wizard Sala did not touch them at all, they would still die from the pressure of their overinflated power after half a day. However, during this half a day, their strength had skyrocketed, and they had become a group of Tier 4 Apex Orcs that did not fear death. In terms of rank, the great wizard Sala had an overwhelming advantage even when facing this group of pinnacle rank 4 Orc petitioners. However, in order to destroy them, Sarah would have to pay an extremely high price. After all, they were now Orc petitioners, and not the original Orc powerhouses. Petitioners, this was an extremely special form of existence. When the pious and outstanding believers died, their souls would be brought to the god's kingdom by the oracles to be reborn and obtain eternity there. With the energy body bestowed by the god, they would no longer have the emotions of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Instead, they would become a pure life form that only knew how to pray for the god day and night, offering their faith. As petitioners, they could not leave the god's kingdom. However, in order to wholeheartedly protect the god they believed in, they would also participate in battles, even the god's war. As petitioners had energy bodies and strong faith, they could leave the god's kingdom through a specific ceremony and transfer to the body of the pious believers in the secular world. However, because the soul energy was too strong, many believers in the secular world could not withstand their immense power and would explode and die. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, no one would be willing to use up the foundation of faith in the secular world. But now, faced with the invasion of the evil wizards, the orcs were helpless. They could only hold a descending ceremony and forcefully guide more than 10 orc petitioners, adding another high-end force to the orc temple. At this point, both sides had used up all their strength and were attacking each other with everything they had. The main battlefield was that level 6 great wizard Gabriel commanding the Storm Giant and Death Wind to fight against Garen's projection, who was also level 6. The battle between the two parties was earth-shattering. Mountains and rivers were collapsing. Not to mention the ordinary orcs, even the great sorcerers felt their blood run cold when they saw that terrifying battle scene. Fortunately, the two of them were able to move further and further away, crushing countless mountains and valleys along the way, fighting all the way to the other side of the Central Mountain Range. The Orc Temple side, on the other hand, was divided into 4 battlefields of different sizes. Grim was confined to the 1,000-meter-wide stone plaza by the Earth Prophet's Law of Earth. Both sides were fighting at close range. The battle was extremely dangerous, and life and death was hanging by a thread. The Earth Prophet had rough skin and thick flesh. Other than his 2-meter-thick stone body, he was also covered with a 3-meter-thick layer of steel rock armor. Grim had already tried all kinds of attacks. The area of effect fire witchcraft was like lighting a fire on a towering mountain. On the surface, it seemed to be burning fiercely and everything was scorched black, but in reality, it could not harm the mountain at all. Only a single target fire wizard spell that gathered the terrifying energy at a single point would be able to break through the thick layers of defense of the opponent and injure the main body. However, this kind of single target fire witchcraft was classified as a super witchcraft. To activate it, it would require at least 7 to 8 seconds of casting time. The Earth Prophet, on the other hand, could easily unleash a large-scale Earth-type attack that could cover an area of 200 to 300 meters. Even Grim could not find the time to cast a super witchcraft when he was restrained and unable to move far away. At this moment, the benefits of the super witchcraft attached to the Earth Prophet's equipment could be seen. With them, Grim had a slight chance of dealing fatal damage to the big guy in front of him. The Ring of Decay. No, with the Iron Cliff armor, the aura of decay couldn't penetrate deep into the Earth Prophet's body, so it couldn't deal enough damage. The Eye of Fury was not worth it. It would take Grim 3 days to concoct the Eye of Fury once, and he would need more than half a month to recover his damaged eye. Grim was extremely unwilling to use such a powerful weapon on the enemy in front of him without any decent spoils of war. He could only use the upgraded Vulcan Orb's Berserk Strike. Having made up his mind, Grim became even more patient and meticulous in his fighting. Against an enemy of the same rank, the slightest bit of carelessness could lead to disastrous consequences. The Earth Prophet's heavy fists and huge feet were enough to make Grim vomit blood if he were to even graze him. If he got the chance, he would be killed in a matter of minutes. Earthquake Slow, Quicksand Trap, Earth Spear Forest, Rock Roar, Earth Rupture, Summon Stone Hound, Giant Rock Smash. The Earth Prophet had countless tricks up his sleeves. Even with the AI chip in Grim's mind, he had to be careful not to make any mistakes. After all, Grim's small body could not withstand a single punch or kick from the Earth Prophet. If Grim's situation was considered difficult, then Rick's could be said to be dangerous. Facing the sinister and cunning dark demonic dragon that was of the same origin as him, Great Wizard Rick was chased by the other party until there was no way out, and had to fight guerrilla warfare in the entire Central Mountain Range. The two of them shuttled and jumped in the sky, sometimes to the east, sometimes to the west, sometimes to the south, and sometimes to the north, with the sky as the stage and the Central Mountain Range as the background. The two fellows proficient in dark magic were entangled with each other. Although the Dark Demon Dragon had a 99% advantage in battle, it was unable to turn its advantage into victory and give Rick a fatal blow. Rick was like a dancer spinning on the edge of a blade. Although he was in great pain, he did not dare to turn around and completely release the Dark Demon Dragon's right to battle. Otherwise, wherever the Dark Demon Dragon entered, the battlefield would collapse in an instant. At that time, the entire mission would fail, and he would probably face severe punishment from the Magus headquarters when he returned. In comparison, the situation of the two great magi, Sala and Colin, was much better. Sala was besieged by 17 peak grade 4 orc petitioners. They were all valiant and unafraid of death. Not only did they have their own battle skills, but they also had the powerful ability of the camp. Strength +3, defense level +10, tenacity +4, reflex +3, vitality +3. And these were just child's play. What really made the orc petitioners exceptionally terrifying was bloodthirsty berserk. All camp buffs were temporarily doubled. During the bloodthirsty berserk period, the orc powerhouses would lose all sense of pain and be immune to the death effect. And their attacks would have various terrifying effects such as tear, heavy hit, paralyze, interrupt, and so on. 17 Tier 4 Pinnacle Orcs were indeed no match for a Tier 5 Great Sorcerer. However, once they were in trouble, one of the Orc petitioners would activate Bloodthirsty Frenzy, using its brainless berserk attacks to repel the Sala's assault. After the Bloodthirsty Berserk period ended, what awaited this Orc powerhouse was only a backlash of power. Even if it did not die, it would be seriously injured. However, during the full power eruption of a peak grade 4 Orc petitioner, even Sala could only temporarily avoid the attack and accelerate its death with a series of spells. Chapter 1496. Compared to Grim, Rick, and Sala, the one who was having the easiest time was Great Wizard Colin. He was only facing a group of middle and low-rank orc warriors that were swarming towards him. Although there were a lot of them, not a single one of them could pose a fatal threat to him. However, Colin's situation was still not looking good. The main reason for this was that the orcs were fighting with their lives. For some reason, all the orc warriors near the temple had gathered here from all directions. They did not have any tactics, nor did they have any order of attack. Almost as soon as they arrived on the battlefield, they rushed towards Great Wizard Colin without any regard for their own lives. Colin was a rank 5 body refinement wizard. His flesh and bones had already been trained to be stronger than steel. His magic and physical resistance were not any weaker than a pure-blooded dragon of the same rank. He had even used all kinds of terrifying witchcraft to transform every part of his body into a magic organ. Once he stepped onto the battlefield, he was like a tireless killing machine. A layer of fine and dense scales appeared on the surface of his body. It was tough and tough. Knives could not cut it, axes could not bend it, needles could not pierce it, and fire could not burn it. His hands had also turned into a pair of strong and powerful claws, flashing with all kinds of strange magic lights. No matter how ferocious the orc warriors were, or how skilled they were in martial arts, they were all like fragile lambs in front of Great Wizard Colin. He clawed them one by one, and the pitch-black magic claws penetrated their hearts, pulling them out one by one and crushing them on the spot. No matter how strong the orc warriors were, they could not withstand such a terrifying attack. A group of orc warriors rushed up, but in less than a quarter of an hour, they were all lying on the ground. Another group rushed up, and another group was lying on the ground. They were like sturdy reefs standing on the shore. No matter how fierce and violent the waves were, they could not do anything to them. They could only be smashed into pieces on the reefs, leaving behind water foam that soared into the sky. Only then did they retreat helplessly. Those who could live near the orc main temple were all elites of the orc race. However, in front of Great Wizard Colin, elite orcs were no different from normal orcs. Corpses of beastmen whose chests and hearts had been dug out covered the tens of thousands of stone steps. Sticky purplish-black blood converged into a stream and flowed down the stone steps. However, just as Colin was killing to his heart's content, the furious roar of the rank 6 great sorcerer, Gabriel, echoed in his mind. Why are you still wasting time there? Destroy the orc temple. Who knows what else those orcs will summon? Hurry up and go. Judging from his voice, Gabriel was extremely furious. It was obvious that his battle with Garen's projection was not going well. Great Wizard Curlin's body trembled. He knew that he had lost his composure. He clapped his hands, and an invisible shockwave surged out, instantly sending the dozens of orcs in front of him flying. Seizing the opportunity, he turned around and dashed toward the peak like a bolt of purple lightning. At the stone square in front of the peak, he stopped and looked around just in time to see Grim fighting with a huge earth prophet. The Earth Prophet's body was overflowing with a thick and powerful khaki halo, binding Grimm to his side, unable to leave. This Earth Prophet had thick skin and a hard shell. Even if Colin met him, he would be like a mouse trying to pull a tortoise, unable to bite it. Hence, Colin did not choose to help Grimm. Instead, he made a small detour, avoiding the Earth Prophet's gravity halo that enveloped the entire area, before rushing toward the main Orc temple. The Orc petitioners surrounding Great Wizard Sala saw this, and wanted to send a few people to intercept him. However, they were stopped by Sala, who had a ferocious smile on his face. Colin's body left a long trail of afterimages, and after a few turns, he disappeared into the main hall. Haha! The Great Wizard Sala, who was surrounded by a group of Orc petitioners, laughed loudly. Now all you have to do is wait for your faith to collapse. However, before he could finish his sentence, a dull thud came from within the temple. Following that, Great Wizard Curlin turned into a purple shadow and flew out at an even faster speed. Looking at his flustered appearance and fearful expression, he did not fly out on his own, but was beaten out by someone. What's going on? Could it be that there's something else in the temple? Just as the few great wizards revealed a look of horror, a ferocious-looking huge double-sided axe flew out from the main hall. With a whistling sound, it caught up to Colin's retreating body and chopped right on his chest. A dull thud sounded. Great Wizard Curlin's entire body suddenly exploded. His body was actually directly blown up by the berserk divine power that was imbued on the huge axe. At the same time that his body exploded, even his soul was directly annihilated by the berserk divine power. Great Wizard Curlin did not even have the time to scream before he was directly obliterated. What? How could this be? A rank 5 wizard was actually directly chopped to death by an axe. This was too unbelievable. Could it be? Could it be? Grimm's heart slightly trembled, and he immediately began to prepare to escape. That huge and ferocious-looking double-sided axe that was covered with ancient divine runes flew back under the guidance of a mysterious force. It landed in the hands of a tall orc who stepped out of the temple. He was tall and sturdy, wearing a heavy and crude black full-body armor. The muscles that were exposed outside the black armor bulged, and his body was densely covered with crisscrossing scars and scratches. His face was ferocious and domineering, and he wore a bone helmet. His head was shaved bald, leaving only a short braid at the back of his head. It was this guy who was not more than 5 meters tall, and he could not sense any energy from his body that actually killed Colin in one hit. However, at the same time, Grimm's heart trembled violently. This guy's appearance was exactly the same as the god of massacre in the orc pantheon, Garanikatis. Grimm couldn't be bothered to find out if the other party was real or not. He immediately attacked the Earth Prophet beside him without hesitation. There was no other way. His body had already been locked in the stone plaza by the Earth Prophet's gravity ring. If he did not get rid of this guy, he would not even be able to escape. Bang, bang, bang. 3 flaming men flew around the Earth Prophet at high speed, teasing him into slamming his giant palm down, but all he did was smash the bluestone floor under his feet into pieces. Taking advantage of the short moment when the Earth Prophet bent over to slap him, Grimm's main body had already quietly closed in on him. A violent stream of flames came out of his mouth and blew on the steel rock armor behind the Earth Prophet's waist. The rock armor that was originally able to withstand the bombardment of level 4 witchcraft was immediately corroded through, revealing the muddy yellow and viscous magma-like body underneath. Grimm did not hesitate, and immediately released the flames stored in the divine fire bead into it. With a flick of his finger, the Earth Prophet that was originally emitting a misty yellow light suddenly became scorching hot, as if he had swallowed a miniature sun, and instantly exploded. Loud sounds rang out from all over the Earth Prophet's body, and large chunks of the iron rock armor shattered and splashed, a fiery paste gushing out from within. The Earth Prophet could not bear such a violent blow, and let out a muffled roar of pain as his entire body was engulfed in flames. But even such a ferocious level 5 fire spell could only heavily injure him and not kill him. The Earth Prophet roared and turned around, intending to use his berserk strength to instantly kill Grim, who was sticking close to him. If it was before, Grim would definitely have dodged and retreated to avoid his opponent's frighteningly powerful counterattack. However, the current situation was extremely critical, and he had a reason that he couldn't back down. Hence, he used a spell for a punch. The fire clone that Grim had left behind was smashed into bits of fire by the Earth Prophet's stone fist, and Grim had used teleportation to deflect the flames into his opponent's body. Asterisk bang bang bang. Asterisk a ball of golden flame flickered and refracted in the Earth Prophet's broken body. Every time it shot out, it would absorb a portion of the external magical energy, increasing the impact of the flames. Hence, after just a few shots, the berserk flames on its surface had already reached 13,000 degrees. If the Earth Prophet was still in one piece, with the protection of the iron rock armor and the suppression of the gravity ring, he might have been able to withstand such a ferocious fire spell. But now, his body was in tatters, and even the source of earth was rapidly leaking out. Under such circumstances, the already heavily injured Earth Prophet could no longer hold on, and his huge body that was barely holding on collapsed as his life force rapidly diminished. Arg! The Earth Prophet let out a muffled roar, and his entire body disintegrated. The gravity ring that had been circling around his body also disappeared. After killing the Earth Prophet with 2 Tier 5 fire spells, Grim grabbed the watermelon-sized Earth Law crystal that had flown out from the rocks and Earth elementals and ran without hesitation, leaving the stone plaza in a flash. Just as Grim was about to destroy the Earth Prophet, the tall orc that stepped out of the shrine swept a fierce gaze across the area, and a tyrannical aura locked onto Grim, Sala, and Rick. Seeing the orcs being slaughtered before him, the tyrannical aura in his body was ignited to the extreme. His eyes turned fierce, and he instantly decided on his next target, Sala. It couldn't be helped, as the orc petitioners around Sala had suffered heavy casualties, and their deaths were miserable. The other party had just slaughtered the orcs in front of his shrine, and he could not help but be furious. So, he raised his right arm, swung his giant axe, and threw it once more. Chapter 1497. Normally, a great wizard would not die so easily. After all, wizards had too many strange spells that could deflect damage or substitute death to protect them. Even in the face of certain death, they still had a lot of tricks up their sleeves to survive. However, these were useless in front of the god of massacre. The malevolent-looking giant double-sided axe that was filled with the aura of slaughter and destruction seemed to have the terrifying effect of annihilating souls. All the wizards who were hit by the axe would have their bodies explode, and their souls would not be able to escape. They could only let out a shrill scream and become a bloody sacrifice for the opponent. Hit, split body, annihilate soul. Not to mention anything else, just by looking at it, Grim could name the 3 rules of this giant axe in one breath. He did not know the rules of the axe, nor did he know how many hidden rules it had. As a body-refining wizard, Colin already had an immortal body. However, in front of the giant axe, he did not even have the chance to resist. He was chopped to death by the axe. The second unlucky sacrifice was the great wizard Sala. Seeing Colin's miserable state, the great wizard Sala had already fled far away. Unfortunately, he did not run fast enough, nor did he run far enough. The giant axe pierced through the sky, broke through the void, and crossed a distance of more than 10 miles, directly landing on the back of the great wizard Sala. The witchcraft shield, elemental barrier, magic protection, and even the rule of the barrier outside his body were like soap bubbles, pierced by the old and simple giant axe. As soon as the giant axe hit him, the great wizard Sala's body disintegrated like a criminal being dismembered by 5 horses. His soul did not even have the time to scream before it was swallowed by the giant axe. In midair, scattered flesh and tattered wizard robes fell from the sky, mixed with broken witchcraft ornaments and 2 or 3 tools shining with strong magical light. The great wizard Sala had fallen. After recalling the giant axe, the tall orc swept his eyes around and quickly locked on the figures of the 2 remaining great wizards, Grim and Rick. As for the great wizard Gabriel, he did not hesitate to escape the moment the tall orc appeared. Grim and Rick were both tripped by their opponents and had yet to escape more than 100 miles away. However, they had split up and were already close to 100 miles away from the orc main shrine. Once he exceeded 100 miles and left the orc main temple's blessing range, the god of massacre, Garanikatas, who had suddenly appeared as true form, would not be able to maintain his level 7 true god powers. He would also be strongly suppressed by the plane's rules. Therefore, the 2 great wizards, Grim and Rick, were flying with all their might, trying their best to reach the line of life and death. The god of massacre, Garen, frowned slightly. 86 kilometers and 93 kilometers. The remaining 2 grand sorcerers were close to the limit of their divine power attack. With their speed, it seemed that only one of them could survive. With a sweep of his eyes, Garen quickly locked onto Grim. It couldn't be helped, as Grim had suddenly unleashed his power before he left and killed an Earth Prophet in such a short time. A Tier 5 Earth Prophet with intelligence wasn't much, but such an act still exposed his formidable combat potential. The other great wizard, Rick, had barely caused any damage to the Dark Demon Dragon. After comparing the 2, Garen, the Tier 7 god of massacre, did not hesitate to set his third and final target on Grim. Exhaling, Garen shook his wrist with all his might and got into a throwing position. The giant double-sided axe immediately broke through the void and quickly chased after Grim. Grim, who was still flying above the central mountain range, suddenly felt a chill in his body, and the chip in his mind immediately issued a shrill warning. Warning, warning, strange divine sense locked on. Attack will arrive in 27 seconds. Can I defend? Grim quickly communicated with the chip in his mind. With the witchcraft defense and rule power that my body has mastered, I can't defend against this level of master divine weapon. Once the master divine weapon attacks my body, my chances of survival will be 0. Using fire clones to escape? Ineffective. Flame leap? Ineffective. Using the Book of Darkness and Vulcan orb to block it? Ineffective. Don't tell me it's ineffective. Tell me a way to survive. Rule fusion. Rule fusion? You've already analyzed all the knowledge about rule movement. Rule movement analysis progress at 31%. My current knowledge is not enough to allow my body to complete a complete rule movement. However, I can barely allow my body to carry out a limited rule fusion. However, forcefully fusing the rules will bring about extremely serious repercussions. Please be careful. Careful my ass. I'm about to die. Why would I care about repercussions? Immediately. Immediately. Now, give me the rule fusion. Grim was practically roaring as he issued his last order. Although he did not hear any wind or sense any foreign objects approaching, Grim's soul had strangely gone berserk. He could already faintly sense the approach of death, and could even smell the murderous and brutal aura on the edge of the giant axe. The Book of Darkness and Vulcan orb that were hidden in Grim's body while he was running for his life surged with the power of the rule, and it quickly covered his entire body. In the next second, Grim's body that was flying swiftly in the sky suddenly stopped for a moment, and then continued to fly away at an extraordinary speed. Garen, who was standing silently in front of the Orc main temple, was stunned. He raised his head, and his fierce and cruel eyes pierced through space and landed somewhere in the distance. Just now, that inconspicuous little sorcerer had used some kind of method to get rid of the divine telekinesis lock and disappeared for an indiscernible moment. He integrated himself into the rules of the plane system and used the plane system to avoid the divine telekinesis lock. Garen's ugly and ferocious face revealed a hint of a sinister smile. "How dare you play this trick in front of me? You're courting death." and 97 miles away, the giant double-sided axe that flew out of the void and went straight through Grim's soul shadow did not hit his body. However, as Garen let out a muffled groan from afar, the giant double-sided axe suddenly erupted with an incomparably tyrannical divine power ripple, shattering all the plane laws within a radius of tens of miles, turning it into a complete mess. Meanwhile, Grim, who had forcefully integrated himself into the rules, appeared from the void, bathed in blood. Being forced out of the law system by the chaotic power of the rules had caused him to suffer unspeakably terrifying damage. His body looked fine on the surface, but everything inside had been turned upside down. All of his flesh, bones, veins, and organs were no longer in their original positions and had appeared randomly in any part of his body. Perhaps this was not the scary part, but the scary part was that every piece of his flesh and skin had been infected by the distorted and mutated power of the rules. The current Grim, if not for the protection of the Book of Darkness and the Fire God's orb, preventing his soul from becoming chaotic, he would have completely mutated into a pile of flesh and blood monsters that had lost their intelligence. 100 miles away, the level 7 god of massacre, Garen, who stood in front of the orc main temple, reached out and caught the giant axe that had been summoned back. Sensing the life aura that had suddenly appeared 100 miles away, Garen's eyes turned sinister, and a surprised expression appeared on his face. Not dead? How is that possible? A mere level 5 sorcerer was able to escape my strangulation of rules? That's impossible. Garen was also extremely surprised. To be honest, with his level 7 true god combat strength, killing a few low-level sorcerers was a piece of cake. So how could there be any accidents? Hence, when the axe had been swung out just now, Garen really did not care too much. He did not even care too much about the little sorcerer who had merged with the rules and just casually dismissed him. Hence, when that little sorcerer's soul aura reappeared, even Garen was slightly surprised. Just as he tried to lock onto the other's aura again, that little worm had already escaped the range of his divine telekinesis without hesitation. This strange change made Garen a little irritated. Damn it, these little worms from the sorcerer civilization were really cunning to be able to escape even like this. Garen's expression could not help but turn gloomy. Behind him, the orc high priest, whose body had already become extremely weak, walked out of the temple with a wooden staff and knelt down in fear and trepidation. Great God, Garen, it was his subordinate's incompetence. I could not block the sorcerer's attacks, so you were forced to reveal your true form. This is this subordinate's sin. Please punish me. Garen did not turn around, but his gaze swept across the devastated and disorderly central mountain range. The joint attack of several great sorcerers had brought an unimaginably terrifying disaster to this orc holy land. Even with Garen's powerful divine telekinesis, he could still sense the miserable and withered life aura near the orc temple. After this disaster, it would be a miracle if even half of the original 300,000 orc elites in the Central Mountain Range could survive. The elite beastmen here were all devout believers of God. As one of Garen's only 7 planes of faith, this kind of loss could be considered a heavy one, and it would also affect the supply of divine power to a certain extent. If this was a normal time, perhaps he could slowly make up for it. But at this juncture where the battle with the sorcerers was so intense, the weakening of divine power was not a good sign. Garen's expression was normal, and he said sternly, "This time it's not your fault. It's a plot by the sorcerers. The Panda Plane is being besieged by the sorcerers. I took the time to rush back, and I must rush back now. As for the remaining sorcerers, you guys hurry up and gather your strength to chase them out. Remember, you must guard this temple. I will temporarily leave the projection here for a while." The orc high priest hurriedly crouched on the ground, obeying the order in panic. The Panda Plane, that seemed to be the origin plane of the god of hatred, Enos. If any accident were to happen there, it would not just be a matter of Enos losing 1 or 2 clones, but a major event that could cause the fall of his main body and his god kingdom. Chapter 1498. Grim was not in a good state. In fact, his current state could no longer be described with simple words such as good or bad. Not only had his body, flesh, and bones mutated, even his law of fire had been messed up to the point where it was unbearable to look at. He staggered all the way back to the sorcerer's camp, his body flying through the air with all sorts of mutated flesh and blood continuously falling from it. When these mutated flesh and blood landed on the ground, no matter what they fused with, they would turn into mutated beasts with strange appearances and strange appearances. Their appearance, shape, and strangeness were completely different from the creatures of other planes. They were like ugly monsters that had messed up their genes and bloodlines. However, they had extraordinary laws and abilities. Grimm staggered through the air, suppressing the chaotic power of laws in his body with the Book of Darkness. He also had to rely on the divine fire orb to protect his soul, preventing the chaos of laws from spreading to his soul. This made his actions even more uncontrollable. Compared to the arrogant and despotic person he had when he first arrived, Grimm was now in a miserable state. It seemed that Grimm's miserable state had caused some orc powerhouses to become restless. Hence, halfway through his journey, Grimm's path was blocked by an orc berserker who emitted a fierce and ferocious aura. This was a powerhouse that was 3 meters tall and abnormally sturdy. He had a shaved head, and his neck was so short that it was almost invisible. He was clad in rhinoceros armor and wielded a large mace. The moment he blocked Grimm's path, he roared loudly. "Evil sorcerer, weren't you very arrogant when you first arrived? Why do you become like this now? Now let me get Gullah." Grimm did not know what it wanted to say after that. He could not be bothered to waste time with such a muscular man, but he was also worried that he would be surrounded by the orcs if he delayed too long. Grimm did not hesitate to release the Ring of Decay, stored in the Book of Darkness. After a dark green aura wrapped around the berserker's hair and skin melted like a melted candle. His entire body began to spew out dark green, poisonous clouds as he stumbled and fell from the sky. The orcs lacked the protection of powerful items. No matter what kind of damage they encountered, they relied on their strong bodies and tenacious willpower to resist. However, against a Tier 5 poison-type law witchcraft, it really couldn't withstand it. That Beastman Berserker hadn't even been able to use a single move before he was sent flying, his life already at its last gasp. Moreover, it was a Tier 4 orc powerhouse. They were no longer afraid of being beaten. Beastmen were a fighting race that never knew fear and retreat. Therefore, not long after Grimm crippled the orc berserker, another orc powerhouse blocked his way. This time, it was an orc sword saint. Moreover, it was a peak Tier 4 sword saint. Even to Muta's plane, he was a well-known, top-notch existence. Even so, Grimm had failed to defeat the orc sword saint. With a single eye of berserk, the orc sword saint had been obliterated instantly. An elementary Tier 5 great sorcerer's attack damage of 15,000 was already considered average. Grimm's eye of berserk, on the other hand, could deal an insane 32,000 damage. Such an attack was enough to instantly kill an unprepared elementary Tier 5 great sorcerer, let alone a peak Tier 4 orc sword saint. The price Grimm had to pay was his right eye exploding into a bloody mess, leaving behind a bloody hole. Only now did the orc powerhouses of the Muta's plane understand the insurmountable gap in strength between them and their enemies. Even if the other party was a weakened great sorcerer, killing them would still be a piece of cake. At the very least, a peak Tier 4 orc sword saint was only worth a right eye. After instantly killing the Beastman sword saint, all the other Beastman powerhouses gave up and no longer dared to make a move. Hence, Grimm was able to stagger back to the sorcerer's camp. The atmosphere in the camp was extremely tense. A few members of the sorcerer's team were anxiously debugging and preparing the interplane long-distance teleportation formation. The great sorcerer Gabriel and the great sorcerer Rick, who had escaped in a hurry, were standing in the middle of the camp, constantly scanning the surroundings. Suddenly, Gabriel's expression froze, and he turned to look at the distant horizon. Rick quickly sensed something as well, and his face was filled with shock and disbelief. I think you said that Garen's main body had his eyes on Grim? Then, what's going on? Gabriel said sternly. This. Rick was also a little confused, and he became incoherent. Sir, I really saw him being targeted by Garen. As for how he survived, I have no idea. While the two of them were conversing quickly and secretly, a black that suddenly appeared at the end of the horizon. It flew up and down randomly in the air, wobbling as it arrived in the sky above the sorcerer's camp. Then it fell head first. Lord Grim seems to be heavily injured. A level 4 sorceress screamed and reached out to support Grim as he fell from the sky. There was a dull thud. Grim, who was in a miserable state, suffered a strong shock, and a piece of flesh the size of a thumb splattered out, landing on the still burning bonfire. The mutated law rippled, and the piece of flesh instantly fused with the flames. In the next moment, a strange creature that looked like a flame putting from afar was created. This was a ball of liquid flame wrapped in a transparent film. Flames roared and collided within it. From time to time, they would rush out from within, emitting intense heat and forming streams of terrifying scarlet flames. Fire sludge monster. No, fire sludge monsters are all low-level monsters. How could they reach level 3? What kind of monster is this? Rick could not help but mutter. The little guy in front of him, just based on its ability to breathe fire and control fire attacks, was already enough to be regarded as a level 3 creature. However, in its extremely strong law of fire aura, he could not sense any spiritual fluctuations unique to intelligent creatures. An unconscious law of mutated monster? It didn't seem to be aware of the huge difference in strength between them, nor did it have the unique sense of danger of a normal intelligent creature. The newborn little guy immediately attacked every wizard on the scene indiscriminately. Moreover, its attack actually contained traces of the power of the law of fire. Although it was very faint, it was clearly discernible. Breer grunted, and with a twist of his spiritual force, he tore the flame, putting into pieces. He then raised his hand and drew an extra-large rune in the air and sent it into Grim's body. Strangely enough, as soon as the rune entered Grim's body, all the chaotic and rioting rule power in his flesh and bones suddenly became stagnant, like a reptile in amber being sealed and suppressed. At this moment, Grim struggled to open his eyes, and he said softly to the Tier 6 great sorcerer, "Thank you, my lord." Although Breer was extremely curious as to how Grim had escaped from the Orc Temple, he was too embarrassed to ask any more questions. He could only wave his hand. The failure of this mission was not due to us. The enemy's strength had exceeded the limits of what we could handle. It's good that you were able to escape alive. If there's anything else, we'll talk about it after we return to the headquarters. Don't worry, the main body of a Tier 7 deity appeared, causing our mission to fail. The headquarters won't hold us responsible. Go back and rest in peace and recuperate. Grim nodded weakly and silently closed his eyes, slowly adjusting the chaotic law of fire within his body. The mission had failed, and they had even lost 2 great sorcerers. Even a Tier 6 great sorcerer like Breer could not accept such a crushing defeat. Hence, after using the teleportation formation to return to the Boulder Fortress, Breer and Rick were forced to undergo a mission inspection by the higher-ups of the headquarters. Grim, on the other hand, was given preferential treatment due to his heavy injuries, and was spared from such torture. He immediately returned to his residence to recuperate. The mission this time could be said to have tormented Grim terribly. Not only was he unable to obtain the mission reward, his main body had also been ravaged to the extreme, and he was only a hair's breadth away from exploding and dying. Even as a law-defying sorcerer, he could not think of a better way to deal with such an infection of the law of fire. He could only slowly extract the law of mutation like a mortal, then replace it with the law of fire. As for the idea of exploding this body and reconstructing it, it was simply nonsense. All of the law of mutation was rooted in his sorcerer origin an astral beast bloodline. Giving up on the law of mutation would mean giving up on everything he currently had. Hence, he could only slowly recuperate and recover bit by bit. Of course, Grimm was still brooding over the failure of the mission in the Mutas plane. He did not know what went wrong that allowed the main body of the Tier 7 God of Massacre to descend, breaking the balance of the war. However, after he secretly visited the great sorcerer Serbo, he vaguely obtained an answer. Just as Grimm and the others failed their mission on the Mutas plane, the Boulder Fortress's annihilation attack on another plane was a great success. The plane of the god of hatred, Ernest, had been destroyed. The god of hatred, Ernest, had luckily escaped death and escaped to the divine kingdom of another orc god. His rank had also fallen from a Tier 5 god to a Tier 4 demigod. There was too much information in this news, to the point that Grimm was a little dazed when he first heard it. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.